released that in June. Towards the end of June, I think it was June 27th, we had a stakeholder meeting. It was rather largely attended. I think we had over 200 participants that were a part of that. Great meeting, both for our partners and for the industry. Currently, we are working on questions. We've got about 50 questions that we're going to be revising and providing answers to. We'll be issuing an addendum later on towards the end of this month. And proposals, you can see, are due from the industry in early August. Our intent to award is in mid-September there. And then, our award and notice proceed, kind of see as we fall in towards the tail end of the year. So we are kind of fast tracking toward this. We want to get this done by the end, or at least get these awards out by the end of the year. Some of y'all may have seen Ohio. Ohio was the first state to actually give award and make their notice of awards. That came last week. They announced 27 sites along their alternative fuel corridors that they will be installing electric vehicle stations. So Ohio was the first state in the country, and we're coming up on them. We'll be in the next grouping. So that's it for NEVI. I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about is a couple of several folks always ask me, especially the ads, ask me about conferences that they should attend or that can attend that I recommend. There are a couple of them coming up. They're actually Labor Day, the week of Labor Day. Unfortunately, they fall at the same dates, but there are two conferences that I would suggest that that you can attend to be able to kind of see what we're doing. One of them is the KYTC FHWA ACEC Partnering Conference. That one, for the first time, will be held in Lexington. It's been held in Louisville for at least the past 20 years, but that one will be held in Lexington this year. We had a meeting last week to go over the topics that were recommended, and those are now being worked on by the Division of Highway Design. So here in the near future, we should have an agenda kind of with the topics that will be presenting at the partnering conference. Again, that is the week of Labor Day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of Labor Day week.
This round of 2021, 23 will end in November.
The other conference that's held those same days is the OKI conference on freight. That one we are partnering with MASTO states, which is the Midwestern ASTRO states, and then also SHASTO, which is the Southeastern states. Kentucky is one of the only two states in the country that are a part of multiple ASTRO groups. So it should be a great conference to be able to really, bring yourself up to speed on a lot of the freight issues and a lot of the freight needs that we're tackling. That one will be held in Cincinnati. Jeremy Edgeworth from KYTC Planning and also Robin Bancroft from OKI are kind of the co-leaders on that. So if you need more information, I know I've sent out several email reminders about it, but that is also another conference that can be attended. That being said, that's all I've got for opening comments. I would like to give the floor to my Assistant Director, Jason Blackburn. He's going to share some questions that he's been receiving and some updates on where we are with Shift. So thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Hey, thanks, Mikhail. Jason, let's see. We got this view thing. You can see Jason up there on the podium.
Oh, you can see me. Okay, it's really just to try to do a quick update to take any questions. So I guess everyone is aware we're starting to get behind because officially should have released those statewide scores Friday or so by the schedule. But if you know me, schedule's a schedule. It'll be done when it's truly time for it to be done. Basically what's going on, we've got the statewide scores calculated, things of that nature. it's in the mode of, what is going to be considered committed versus non-committed. And it's a lot of if then type statements. It's what's being run, right now with the decision makers. There's a lot of opportunities out there. We've applied for several different grants, and that's going to have a huge impact on how we move forward. If we get a grant for this $500 million project, that's great. It's going to pay for 80% of it. So we will have this kind of money. If we don't, we're still going to do that project perhaps. So where does that, kind of money come from? That's what's playing out. The hope and intent is probably a week behind. So hopefully late Friday or kind of first thing Monday, I will be able to send that stuff out. And that would include the statewide committed stuff, along with kind of those scores, and then the regional. We're expecting to have all final regional scores perhaps by Friday afternoon. Well, I'll say Monday morning type situation, and those will come out. And so that puts us, like I said, maybe 1 week behind. That's not too bad. That's basically it. Where we stand, we'll kind of pick back up, with that. Of course, that'll go back into your all's realm of boosting and things of that nature. You have a few months to take care of that. I think with the latest updated schedule, those final plans will be due at some point. Yeah, we reinstituted those final plans, and those will be due at the same time that the boosting, whatnot, will be due. Any questions or anything?
Any questions for Jason? Shift anything. Excuse me, we had a meeting yesterday and we had a few questions, I guess. What do you think, Jim? Like we're going to ask him specifically. Maybe schedule, on it. Any schedule questions? NPOs, anybody? District offices?
Will boost window then be extended as well?
Will the boost window be extended as well?
Say no. I mean, that boost window is what, over 2 months, 2.5 months or so to begin. It's
like
September. So that's basically still gives around 2 months. I mean, if for some odd reason I can't, if it's the window should close on like a Friday, and it's like, well, just how our schedule is, we can't meet until Monday, let me know. If you're saying, well, since we're going to wait another month, then that's a total different issue. I mean, that's just, it's just part of the situation that little things come up. Oh,
Cool. Let's see.
a lot of red lights on here, and my camera was clear. Sorry.
KLTC mic is very garbled. My camera was very clear. He's still here, but that is still garbled. Oh well, I agree.
I agree. Oh, Joe agrees I'm gobbled up too. Oh, well, it's gonna be a long conference thing, because I think there's gonna be several people using the Google mic. That's it's all right. Any other questions or anything?
I don't see any, I don't see anybody.
Do want to give a little bit of a shout out to those couple of districts who came in person. Showing some pain. I'm hoping that we'll stay for an afternoon, interesting session and whatnot. I was feeling that might not be, but for those that are here, good job.
All right, thanks, Jason. All right, let's see. Figure out what I'm doing here. Okay, next step we had John Valentine was on the schedule, but the mandatory meeting. So something. So let me read this. Let me share my screen. Okay. Everybody can see that, I guess. Let me see it here. Let's see. Right now, I'm still garbled on this microphone. There's somebody else. Okay, good. Okay, so Representative email these out to us, and bunch of comments, deliverables and things. I'll just read words. So there's a few things we would submit. I like this heavy vehicle use tax triangle report. HPMS annual field reviews. We'll probably talk about some of that in the pure afternoon sessions. Four ways growing roads were urban in Kentucky. It's a request public pedestrian safety testing for new model year vehicles. So that's interesting. USDOT public comment on DOT equity action plan. So we'll go presenter today on that. And let's see, this is rural electric mobility infrastructure toolkit. Protect discretionary applications due August 18th. 2020 census implementation for transportation planning revenue, reconnecting communities program. Applications due September 28th. We have a couple general updates over those two. Spence Bridge Planning Days in the process. NPO in Paducah. So I looked at generally NPO over there. Staffing updates and Buckner is the new discretionary grants program advisor. And Kevin Sandifer retired from us, but he's over there now as the bridge engineer. And this can be for that meeting later. So let me stop sharing. Thank you, FHWA. And let's see. I'm having trouble. Initially, was introducing me. I'm going to try to push it out of here. Is it a little bit clearer? Let me. Is it clear now? I was turning down speed.
Still garbled.
Still garbled. Let's see. How am I going to fix that? It's not really encouraging comments. Let's see. That sounds great in person. Let's see what else can I do here for the sound. My microphone a little bit maybe. Speakers. Okay, is it clear now or is it still garbled?
It sounded like it was a little bit better, but it's still a little rough. I think somebody might have said that slowing down and speaking a little clearer may help.
Okay. I probably shouldn't touch anything the same. I've got the now. Is it better now? Or is it just softer? Am I speaking clearly now, or is it?
Yeah, that sounds better, right? Whatever you're doing right there.
Well, let me freeze it right there. Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully that fixes it. Okay, so Jared Jeffers is in the audience. Okay, good. We got a presenter here today. Jared Jeffers has been here for how long? You been here now? About a year? Yeah, 1 year. How about that? Congratulations! And he passed his PE like last year, I think, or so. Is that okay? Is that yeah? Okay, it's getting close. Okay, so share the screen. Let me share your presentation here. Planning technical assistance. Okay, so he's got a bio too. Let me read his bio. Okay, Jared Jeffers is graduate of UK. It's a degree in civil engineering. He's been working for the Division of Planning SPAC branch as a planning study project manager and an MPO liaison. So you get all kinds of good experience. So good. Yeah, thanks for being here to share. Brent Swager was kind of working with you on this land use implementation type thing. So can you see it on your screen? Mm-hmm. I guess just say next or something else. Let me get in presenter mode. But remember how to do this every time. How do you present in presenter mode again? Anybody know?
A slideshow or there's a
slideshow. There we go. And from beginning. Ta-da! And just tell me when you want to go next. You can't click next probably there, right? So just holler at me.
I'll holler at you.
Hey, go ahead.
All right. Hey, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Jacob. I'm here to talk to you about a program that is coming up through KYTC, focused on land use and transportation integration. And it's going to be targeted at smaller communities and helping them put together small areas of land use and transportation integration. And next. So the purpose of this program is mainly to assist communities in developing smaller areas of their communities in a thoughtful manner, which, you know, growing smartly and making sure the land use is like very mixed use and things like that. And we want to target it at smaller areas, like 30 to 160 areas. And I have a sort of visualization of what that looks like on scale. And we just want to make sure that we have a cohesive vision behind our land use priorities in these areas and try to integrate them into our state network correctly. So there's going to be a few aspects of what we expect to see in these land use plans. And one of the main aspects will be a neighborhood center. So this small area will have many different land uses, but we want to have at the heart of it a neighborhood center, which is mixed use and highly dense with commercial, residential, and things like that. And then around the neighborhood center, we want to have things that support that land use of a neighborhood center. And one of those would be traditional neighborhood housing, single family duplexes. And we want that to be in close proximity to that neighborhood center so they can walk and enjoy all the things that comes with that neighborhood center. And then we can also, around those land uses, have some other supporting uses. Hotels, grocery stores, things that people would want close by to their living spaces and where they walk and go out. So this is a visualization for kind of the area that we want to focus on. 30 to 160 acres is a pretty big range, but I think that gives us a good variation in the applications we'll get. And we want it to be accessible for areas just where they have space. And if we want that space to be able to fit into how we can help them. Go back on. There you go. Yeah, good. So this will be sort of the process of how we go about creating this land use integration. And so first, we want these communities to identify an area that they want to develop or that they see redevelopment infill being a priority. And so, yeah, the first thing would be to identify that area and then create how they see the future land use being, where they want those designated spaces. And on this, you can see a neighborhood center in the middle with supporting land uses around it, housing, grocery, things like that. And then the next step would be to plan the transportation sort of around that land use and incorporate trails, sidewalks, and connect into our roads and have a strong connection into the already created roadway system so that we're not separating things from each other. And so these are some of the results we expect to see. We want to redevelop in ways that are building communities. And we want to see communities thriving and be walkable, connected, people enjoying themselves, getting outside. And we think that this will help some smaller communities who maybe don't think about mixing land use and going into these sorts of land use things to help them create these spaces in their communities rather than just having these sort of spaces in major cities in Kentucky and downtowns. So here, a brief rundown of the logistics is that we'll put out an application form and have local communities send in applications. We'll have criteria and a scoring system, and we will score them and pick winners. We plan to pick 3 communities to do this in for fiscal year 24. And the Division of Planning SPAC branch will manage the contract, and it'll go through our statewide planning contract through the on-call. But we'll work closely with the communities that we want to put this into. All right, well, yeah, that's about it. I mean, the main thing is, so this program will be coming out soon, and we have an application pretty much ready, but once Brent gets back, we'll send an email blast, and we just want you guys to share it with local communities, LPAs, any land use planners that you know. I think this would be good for the ads. to share with as many land use planners, try to get the word out to the LPAs. And that's about it.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Jared.
Thanks.
Anybody got any questions for Jared about what we're doing here? Yeah, go ahead.
Just quick, when you're talking about small communities, what are you?
Talking to this,
Mhm.
talking to that microphone if you don't mind.
Squeeze out of here.
Let's see if that's even turned on. Let me just make sure it's on. Yeah, it's on. I think it's on. Just test.
Yeah. Speaking of small communities, are you speaking of communities that are outside a TMA area, or can they still be in a TMA that are a small city or something?
So I think the way we want to go with it is communities that don't have a larger planning organization over top of them. So areas that are smaller than 50,000 and don't have an MPO or TMA sort of encapsulating them. We want to, because the way we see it is that they have a planning agency sort of that can help them. We want to target this towards areas that maybe don't get any planning help and assist those communities. If
Okay,
that makes sense.
thank you.
Cool. And the ads, we collected something like that, didn't we, Jim? Like a couple of years ago for comprehensive plans, I think is what we got. But we checked like something about land use. So we got a little bit of records going. But that's basically what they're going to be looking for is contacts, local zoning agencies that you know of in your area, or if you don't have one, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we'll send an email out in the future. Oh, we got a hand up.
We got another question back there. Hey, can you use the microphone, or is it a short question? I'll just repeat it. Okay. There you go.
Are you going to be communicating with the Kentucky chapter of the American Planning Association? Or if not, if you would just, when I get that email, I'm happy to do that for you. It's just if you're wanting to reach the land use planners throughout the state, that would be your primary point of contact.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And Brent may have been planning to do that. I know he is slightly involved with the APA of Kentucky.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I'm sure he'll reach out. And if not, I'll let him know to reach out to you.
Yeah, good point, Angela.
Mhm.
Yeah, APA is a good resource. Good promotion. Let's see. Anybody else got any questions for Jared? If not, so what time we got here? Yeah, good job. Good job. Everybody get around. Applause for Jared. Good job. Okay, so let me see. I'm not sharing my screen, I don't believe. So now our next presenter, let me see if I've got him as a co-host. Okay, Michelle Ethan is a co-host. Okay. Michelle, are you on here?
I should be. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you. Let me read your intro real quick. Okay, Michelle Ethan.
Excellent.
Michelle Ethan is an environmental protection specialist working for the Office of the Secretary, Office of Policy. Her portfolio includes environmental justice, NEPA, and the Justice 40 Initiative. She and the USDOT Justice 40 program lead, Kristen Wood, are charged with implementation of USDOT's Justice 40 Initiative. So, Michelle, with that, go ahead and share your screen. I believe that you have the power to do that.
I should.
Let's see.
There we go.
There you go. Good job.
Excellent. And let me apologize in advance. So usually, so Kristen Wood is the Justice 40 lead. And again, as Jacob mentioned, I work also in the Office of Policy for USDOT. We are both remote located. Kristen actually is gone today, but we have designed this PowerPoint such that usually the two of us operate it. Oops, I think we've lost the share screen. Let's
Okay.
just see. Hold on. Let's see if we can get this to work. There we go. Now, can you see my screen?
Okay, hold on just a minute. I'm trying to for the in-person audience here. I've got
Okay.
Jared's presentation was still up.
That's fine. Well, while you are doing that, I'll just say to everybody that we've embedded some animation. So I'm actually going to be reading and clicking at the same time. So we'll see how this goes.
It's interesting. Yeah, you're good.
We're good? Okay, excellent. No, I appreciate it. So as mentioned before, both Kristen and I are remote located. Well, neither one of us are in DC. She is in New England. She's away today, and I'm actually on the other end of the country. I live in Fairbanks, Alaska. So the communication and the conversation about rural communities is near and dear to my heart. Though Fairbanks has an MPO, I have a history of working with communities of much less than 50,000. So great to hear advocacy for those. That's always good. So I'm just going to jump right in. The intent today is to talk about USDOT's Justice 40 initiative, and most in particular, our release of the ETC Explorer and how it can benefit planning projects that you have for Kentucky. So hopefully we can get this to click forward.
Yeah, it worked.
Excellent. So the U.S. Department of Transportation recognizes that past federal transportation investments have too often failed to address inequities or even have made them worse. In light of this, DOT is committed to pursuing a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all. As part of the Justice 40 initiative, USDOT is developing tools to assist communities in understanding the cumulative impacts that result from the lack of affordable, safe, multimodal transportation options, and how to connect components of disadvantage to the benefits projects are expected to deliver. Overall, Justice 40 seeks to deliver 40% of the benefits of certain federal investments to disadvantaged communities that face burdens related to climate change, the environment, health, and economic opportunity. A core priority for USDOT in its efforts to advance equity and Justice 40 is to begin to address transportation insecurity. So what is transportation insecurity? It is a key component of transportation disadvantage. Transportation insecurity occurs when people are unable to get to where they need to go to meet the need of their daily life regularly, reliably, and safely due to either the high cost of transportation, lack of access, or lack of safe transportation options. Nationally, there are well-established policies and programs that aim to address food insecurity and housing insecurity, but not transportation insecurity. USDOT is working to change that as a growing body of research indicates that transportation insecurity is a significant factor in persistent poverty. Today, as I mentioned, we are here to discuss the Equitable Transportation Explorer, or we call it the ETC Explorer. In addition to the ETC Explorer, USDOT also recently released a Justice 40 story map that's on our website, which provides case studies that use the ETC Explorer and demonstrate the connection between the components of disadvantage and project benefits that may help reverse or mitigate how a community experiences disadvantage, and an updated Justice 40 website with information on the three major components of USDOT's Justice 40 initiative. When decision makers at all levels have tools to reverse or mitigate the causes of disadvantage, the result is a higher quality of life and economic prosperity in all communities. Through the Justice 40 initiative and the ETC Explorer, USDOT is providing metropolitan planning organizations, MPOs, state DOTs, and local decision makers tools to help select projects that meet the transportation needs of an area, which in turn help to strengthen communities and create more equitable opportunities for daily life. As I mentioned before, earlier this year, we created and released the first of its kind transportation specific tool, the ETC Explorer. So you can see that on the page now. I'm showing that basically the dashboard of the national results. This tool supports decision-making for how resources and programs can be uplifted under-resourced and transportation disadvantaged communities. It harnesses the latest census tract data across federally available data sources to provide users a centralized, easy-to-use platform that creates visibility into drivers of transportation disadvantage. The Explorer incorporates a transportation disadvantage index that includes 40 elements across 5 categories of disadvantage, including transportation insecurity, environmental burden, health vulnerability, climate and risk burden, and social vulnerability. And before we get too far, There is a tab here on understanding the data, and we also have the information on the Justice 40 website. If you want to see all of those 40 indicators, they are all publicly available. So in addition to the dashboard display of overall transportation disadvantage component percentile rankings, which is right here, sorry. There is a pop-up data boxes, which provide more specific information, and then the percentiles down here. We'll go through each of those in the next few slides. The user base of the Explorer includes US DOT members who are interested in supporting agency-wide priorities and metrics for covered programs, impacts, and assessing program effectiveness, applicants who can use the tailored insights to develop better programs and projects based on how communities are experiencing disadvantage and explain the impacts of their projects in their grant applications, and state planners, MPOs, TMAs, who can understand the localized impacts within specific regions to support funding decisions and provide visibility into community impact. Different features within the tool support different uses. So there's a national results tab, which allows users to see insights at a national level, understand how their project area is experiencing transportation disadvantage compared to all census tracts nationally across the 5 component areas. There's a state results tab, and that's an important tab because it actually then looks at the components against the census area tracts within a state. So that's important for MPOs and TMAs to be able to make decisions and be able to articulate the percentile ranking of disadvantage against all the rest of the tracts, for instance, within Kentucky. That's an important tool. Lastly, there is the transportation insecurity analysis tool. And again, we're going to demonstrate some of those as we go through. And that feature visually displays, it starts with the raw data for a selected group of indicators related to transportation cost, access, and safety at the national or state level that reflect transportation insecurity. And so you can click on those indicators, apply layers, and basically you can visually get down to where those components specifically are within a project area. So it's important to note that DOT's ETC Explorer, it's not a binary tool indicating whether a census tract is considered disadvantaged or not. It is a dynamic tool that allows every community in the country to understand how it experiences transportation disadvantage, which transportation impacts have the power to mitigate or reverse. The 3 core benefits and outcomes from using the ETC Explorer: equity in planning. So by understanding how community characteristics and gaps, users can create effectiveness of resource allocation and improve program design. It starts by understanding what the key drivers of disadvantage are as they relate to particular program scope. Localized decision-making, so as we just heard with land use planning. MPO, states, and other regional players have a more robust data and insight to address root causes of transportation disadvantage. And building trust. One of the first steps to effectively engaging in community impacted by a program or a project is to understanding the root causes of transportation disadvantage. This helps provide insight into historical factors and challenges, which helps with the prioritization and support areas in defining the project scope. At the heart of it all, the ETC Explorer sheds light into the cumulative community impacts that result from the lack of affordable, safe, and multimodal transportation options. Users can take the insights to connect components of transportation disadvantage to the benefit transportation projects are expected to reverse or mitigate. So what you see here is the Disadvantaged Community Index. This gives you a little bit of insight into the back of the ETC Explorer. So the ETC Explorer uses a Disadvantaged Community Index as a basis for the identification of transportation disadvantaged communities. The methodology is based on the Center for Disease Controls and Prevention's Environmental Justice Index, EJI. So I think many in the room are probably familiar with that, and includes climate and disaster risk components from NOAA's Climate Mapping and Resilience and Adaptation tool. DOT has developed and added a robust transportation and security component, which was developed by US DOT that includes transportation cost burden, access burden, and safety elements. The 5 disadvantaged components you can see here on the screen within the tool are comprised of 40 indicators, as I mentioned earlier. Each indicator has a set of variables that are calculated to eventually provide an overall score and final ranking. Census tract on project areas at a 0% are considered the least disadvantaged, and 100% are considered the most disadvantaged. But again, remember, the tool is not a binary tool. So for every project area, you will see the component score ranking, which allows you to dig a little further to find out what the needs are within that community. So DOT attributes the transportation disadvantage designation to all tribal jurisdictions and territories, as well as to all census tracts experiencing disadvantage if the overall index score places it in the 65th percentile or higher of all US census tracts. The 65th percentile was chosen because it achieves a similar proportion of disadvantaged census tracts as CGEST, around 1/3 of all tracts. So CGEST is it's the all government-wide release as part of the Justice 40 initiative. DOT economists also reviewed where the 65th percentile landed across data sets like poverty, housing cost burden, and transportation cost burden, and find that this ranking lines up fairly well with our understanding of disadvantage. So finally, let's dig into the tool. We had an RFI out earlier this year to make, when we released the tool, because there was an earlier version called the transportation, well, we called it the DAC, as we prepared to put the ETC Explorer out. So in response to comments received in the RFI process, a community selector was added in addition to the state, county, and MPO selector. So you can see this up here. Again, we had talked about in the dashboard, there's national results, state results, the transportation and security analysis tool, understanding your data, and you can actually add your own data. But what we found, and a lot of comments, was that it was really important to be able to select on communities. So I'm going to walk you through how you can do that. And there's tutorials within the homepage as well as on our Justice 40 page. So please, at your leisure, please plunk through. But let me address this now. So again, the RFI process, a community selector was added in addition to the state, county, and MPO selectors so that you can see the data associated with a selected jurisdictional boundary. To use the county and community selectors, you must first choose a state in the state selector. So in this case, Alabama has been chosen. The MPO selector cannot be used in combination with the other 3 selectors. So just remember, if you're going to use MPO, then you can't use the community selector. Some of you have reached out because your city or town is not appearing on the list of communities in the community selector. The communities listed are those that the census area recognizes as incorporated places. In certain parts of the country, the census recognizes unincorporated places as different jurisdictional boundaries than a traditional city, town, or borough. So let's see if we can get our animation to work here. When this occurs, we recommend turning on the community boundaries layer. So you can see, there's a variety of options within the dashboard. Again, it's an open Esri product. I'm sure many of you are used to utilizing this. You go over to the layers element. In the layers, you can turn layers on and off. Again, for those of you that have worked within an open source Esri environment, this is on, this is off. So in this case, we recommend turning the community boundaries layers on. When this occurs, then use the tool to outline the particular area. And that will provide you accurate data on the level of disadvantage experience as well as population statistics. So there's a pop-up box that we mentioned. This provides a lot of granular data that you can click through, and then you can also see the level of disadvantage within this particular area. We recommend this strategy when the census tracts cover multiple communities. So we'll talk a little bit about the data layers that I just mentioned. So you can select data layers that provide additional information related to the project or funding program that somebody might be applying to strengthen the understanding of the conditions of the project area or community. And these data layers include jurisdictional boundaries, safety data, MPO areas, national transit map routes, national transit map stops, alternative fueling station, aviation facilities, class 1, 2, and 3 freight rail lines, passenger lines, intercity bus layers, tribal jurisdictions, areas of persistent poverty, air mitigation non-attainment areas, and CGEST disadvantaged tracts. We have included some examples here to give you a sense of how they can be used. Our first example has the FARS data turned on. And that's the FARS safety data and national transit map routes and stops turned on right here. Where the black and green dots overlap, users can understand that fatalities are taking place at transit stops. The second example has tribal jurisdictions turned on. That's the purple. And the CGEST disadvantaged census tracts layers turned on. When applying to any US DOT Justice 40 covered program, tribal jurisdictions as well as US territories can indicate that they have a disadvantaged community designation under both the ETC Explorer and CGEST. The third example demonstrates that the data available on the disadvantaged components layer, each of the DOT's 5 disadvantaged components, so that was these, can also be displayed as a heat map. So you can turn them on as a layer so you can see the percentile as a heat map. So that data is available for both national and state level. Let's see if I can get one more. There we go. Finally, the fourth example is demonstrating our aviation facility, passenger rail, and intercity bus layers. So again, those were turned on. You can see those visually available on the map screen. Next, we are going to look at a Kentucky specific example. So we're going to go through a case study using a recent award through the Safe Streets and Roads for All funding program. So in 2003, and many of you probably know this way better than my talking points. In 2003, a referendum merged Louisville and Jefferson County, which more than doubled the city of Louisville's population and increased its population by more than 6-fold. The newly formed Louisville, Jefferson County and metropolitan government recognized the area's safety challenges and made the decision to switch from a reactive to a proactive approach to safety, which resulted in the Vision Zero Louisville Safety Initiative. And again, I recognize that many of you know much more about this than I do. We literally took a lot of this information right from the Safe Streets for All grant award. But we'll see how the ETC can give us a deeper dive into what might have been happening there. So in February, Louisville was awarded $21 million to fund safety improvements on 10 road corridors that included road diets, bike lanes, mini roundabouts, accessibility improvements, curb extensions, and more. So the question is, how could Louisville have used the ETC Explorer, had it been available at that time, to better develop their application? On the screen you now see is the national results feature. So national results tab. I'll go into detail about how to use the data included in the feature during right here. So the first item to note is that the census tracts in light purple, these, are triggering as disadvantaged using DOT's definition. And if you're going to go into the layers feature and turn on the CGEST layer, those in orange are triggering as disadvantaged in CGEST. So again, if they were using the application to apply, they could demonstrate that they were both triggering disadvantage under DOT's definition as well as meeting CGEST definition. The two layers that we have turned on in this example are the FARS safety data layer All the black dots are where fatal accidents have occurred and the community boundaries. DOT attributes the transportation disadvantage designation to all tribal jurisdictions and territories, as I mentioned before, as well as census tracts experiencing disadvantage if the overall index places it in the 65th percentile or higher. So you can see the overall score is higher. You can see the percentile rankings here. But from a high level, you can see that we have selected the project area included in the application. The total population in the project area is 40.9 thousand people. 37.7 are living in disadvantaged census tracts. You can see that down here. That data is available right here. Doing some quick math, that means 92% of the residents in the project area are living in disadvantaged communities, and that 88% of the project area is triggering as disadvantaged under DOT's definition. In this example, you can see the components exceeding the 65th percentile. That's this line right here. And what I will note is that although the overall project area is not exceeding the 65th percentile in transportation and security, when you do take a deeper dive, you can click down on this part of the dashboard to be able to see the components that make up transportation and security. You will see that the project area does in fact exceed the 65th percentile in transportation, cost burden, and safety right here. So backing up, and again, I'm giving a pretty fast overview of the actual tool. You can click on each of these component areas to get a little bit more of that granular data. And again, while it doesn't trigger high overall, if we click on it, we see indeed there is a significant level of transportation and security related to cost and safety. When identifying projects and developing their own application, had they been using this, they would cite the data related to safety and how the project area is experiencing disadvantage and how the proposed project could reverse or mitigate those causes of disadvantage. So if I can forward this. All right. Now moving into the transportation insecurity analysis tool. So again, the dashboard, just to repeat this, the dashboard shows you the data under both national, or we could have done a comparative to state results. But if we want to get look on the backside on the raw data as it relates to transportation and security, we use the transportation insecurity analysis tool. So in this example, we have turned on the filter to zoom to the state of Kentucky. You know a filter is turned on when the radial button is green. That's right here. Let's see if I can get my animation to work. We have also now turned on the community boundaries and the FARS data layers. We went to our layers list, we turned on the community boundaries, and we wanted to see the safety data. So now we've turned on the safety filters. So over here, there's a series of filters that are related to transportation and security. We went in, we hit some presets, the safety filters. We wanted to see above average and high. And have filtered those for the motorist fatalities. What is happening within the transportation and security analysis tool is, as you recall, within the polygon, any areas where green are what is triggering is left out of the filtering. So now with these additional filters on, you can see that it is isolated the areas that within the green color that are meeting these conditions, right? So those census tracts in the green blue are meeting that criteria. And you can see that those are experiencing above average or high motorist and non-motorist total fatalities. And we could look at each of those categories separately as well. In this example, we have turned off the DOT cost and access tracks layer and turned on the DOT and CGS disadvantage tracks. So we want to look at it differently. to see where there are fatalities in relation to those disadvantaged census tracts. And again, the blue-green isolates those particular areas. So, and now turn back on our motorist and non-motorist filters census tracts by turning on the DOT cost and access layer. So I get that right. Finally, there's a pop-up data box that gives you the safety summary for each of the census tracts. And here we can learn that the overall census tracts has 14 fatalities, 10 being motorist and 3 being non-motorist. And if you click on the black dots, you can learn specifically where the fatality involved a motorist, a cyclist, or a pedestrian. So you can get some very good granular data that can support the more percentile ranking information that you receive in the dashboard. So the purpose of this is to be able to not only be able to see how an area is ranking nationally and what the levels of insecurity, of transportation insecurity or disadvantage are, but then to be able to back it up with actual data and information within that particular census tract. And I apologize for how fuzzy this screen is, but I think I can cover what the difference is here verbally. So I have mentioned a few times the CJEST, which is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, CJEST. And then, of course, there's the ETC. Why is this important? Well, the White House Council on Environmental Quality put together CJEST. CJEST is the primary tool that is used under the Justice 40 initiative, which is in support of Executive Order 14008. So if an applicant is responding to a NOFO that is in support of the Justice 40 initiative, we do suggest as part of the NOFO language that you can utilize CJEST to identify disadvantaged communities. But CJEST is a binary tool. So in other words, when you use CJEST, it's going to tell you if an area triggers for disadvantage or doesn't trigger for disadvantage. It doesn't give you granular data. So that is why we created the ETC Explorer, to be able to give more granular data. So that doesn't matter if an area triggers as disadvantage or not, that as planners, MPOs, TMAs, small communities that are just applying for DOT funding opportunities, they can actually address some of the broader issues. So that's the primary difference between the two. The other important difference, and I think in particular for all of us in the audience today, is that the CJEST right now is using 2010 census tracts. They have not been able to update to the latest census tract data. Because of our number of programs that statutorily require the latest census tract data, in particular, Safe Streets for All, we are using the 2020 census tracts. And essentially what that boils down to is that in 2020, the census created approximately 12,000 new tracts. So many of those tracts were split, some were combined, and overall this produced different patterns of disadvantage. We've done some analysis, and there is about an 80% overlap in the census tracts between the 2010 and 2020, but it's difficult. It's not apples to oranges. So essentially, to make it a little easier, that's why we allowed the layer within the ETC that you can turn on CJEST, kind of a one-stop shop if you need to be able to click and say, does this also trigger under CJEST? As far as DOT is considered, you can utilize either one for any sort of granting programs. But again, I think for a community, they may find advantage to be able to say, well, we trigger under CJEST as well as under the ETC. So that's important. This information is also available on our website. And last but not least, I'm sure you have questions. I went over this very, very fast in recognition of some time, but this is an important piece here. And I sent Jacob a PDF of our presentation today that won't have the animation, but does have the salient points. And this is probably the most important one. If you have questions, we do have a Justice 40 email address. Both Kristen and I check that daily. And that's justice40@dot.gov. And then, of course, you can go to USDOT's Justice 40 website that has a link to the ETC Explorer. It has the tutorials. It has all the webinars that we've done that go into far more detail. And those are both translated into Spanish and the English version. And then it also has a link to the story map, which kind of articulates a little bit more on how projects can benefit from the application of understanding disadvantage overall for those project areas. So with that, let's see, I can take questions if I can plunk my page back up and see what's going on.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. That's a fascinating tool. When did that tool come out?
We released, time flies. I believe we did a release. It's a great question. I think it was in February. It was in this year, whether it was February or March. The other day, somebody asked me and I was like, it's all come together. February or March, it came out.
Let's see, has anybody got any questions for Michelle? Let's see, nothing in the chat box, anybody in the audience? For Justice 40 tool, in my mind, it kind of goes toward like prioritization. It's so new, I guess have you seen anybody using it for like actual prioritizing roads? Or like a long range plan, like performance measures and stuff? Is anybody using this data yet that you've seen, or is it still so new, I guess?
I think it's fairly new. We've been what I would call on the roadshow, virtual roadshow, working with folks and understanding that, again, there is a lot of tools out there. The sensitivity, the fact that you've got to use the best tools for you, and you're going to have localized tools, you're going to have statewide tools that make a lot of sense. What I think the important piece here is that this is all publicly available data that we pulled together. And so I think for the planners that are in the room, if I were you, I would, if it was me, I would likely go and look at the understanding data. So you have an idea of what the background data is, figure out how that works in conjunction with the tools that you're currently using. I think the most valuable outcome of the ETC that we wanted to put together is, again, to avoid that binary, you're either in or out. That certainly, communities are going to seek advantage of saying that they're disadvantaged for the purposes of programs, that the Justice 40 covered programs. But a community may not trigger in the 65th percentile across the board, but that doesn't mean that there aren't levels of disadvantage, or cumulatively, there aren't levels of disadvantage that are affecting them. So to be able to really look at something in a holistic standpoint and see, filter on income quintiles versus transit stops versus climate or environmental burden, I think helps us address those sort of larger issues writ large. So that's our hope in creating the tool, and that it has a lot of durability, long-term, and usefulness. And of course, we're always open to suggestions. Everything is a work in progress, so.
Yeah, okay. Let's see, Bernadette's got a question. It says, is there a plan to phase out the CEJST, and will there be a push to switch to ETC?
Well, CJST is a White House tool. We work in conjunction with the White House and CEQ for the rollout of the Justice 40 program. We had a conversation the other day, and I asked when they may be going to the 2020 census tract data. I think they're working through that themselves. As I think anybody who's been in the room has maybe been through one of these, you're trying to create a tool, it takes quite a bit. I anticipate, I can't speak on their behalf, I anticipate that they're going to integrate the 2020 census tract data soon, and will likely keep their tool. But again, their tool is more of folks should go look at their tool. I mean, I think it has useful benefits, but it is a broader tool that's government wide. So they have eight components And an area can trigger in any one of those 8 that may not be transportation related. That may be useful in informative information, depending upon what's happening in Kentucky. It might be really important that it's a social indicator or that it's triggering under, something that isn't specific to transportation. So I think much like everything else, all tools are important and relevant in their own space. But the CGES tool is really looking at all of sort of like a larger 70,000 foot view of transportation, or excuse me, of disadvantage. Sorry, I was reading at the same time. Apologize.
Yes, okay. Yeah, appreciate that. Brandy Peacher, next speaker. She's got how many data sources is the ETC pulling from, and what are the primary sources outside of the census data?
As I mentioned before, there's 40 indicator sources, and if you when you go in there, you can see understanding the data, and you can see where they're primarily pulled from. The Center of Disease Control. We've got some NOAA data, and all of those are public data sources, government data sources that are updated continuously. So that's what I would suggest, is if you want to get into exactly where they're pulled from, that information is under the tab understanding the data. And it's also, we have a methodology document that is available on the website. And I think for many of you, that's kind of important to be able to see what you're looking at. And that's there.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yes, you're in Alaska right now.
I am in Alaska right now, yes.
The internet connection seemed like it was clear.
Believe it or not, we have we have pretty good broadband up here.
Yeah, thanks for being here and sharing that with us, Michelle. And I don't see any other questions, so let's give Michelle a round of applause.
Well, thanks, everybody, and I don't want to take any more of your time, so have a great rest of your session.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for being here.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see the next topic. Brandy Peacher just asked a question there. She's our next speaker on the Town Branch Commons. I've got a bio here. Let me read it for Brandy, and then we'll take a break after this one. Brandy Peacher is the Director of Project Management in the Office of the Mayor with the Lexington Fayette Urban County Government. Her architecture and urban design career has allowed her to work on a variety of commercial, residential, and public projects in Chicago, Dubai, and Lexington. Currently, Peacher oversees a variety of civic endeavors, including the Town Branch Commons portfolio of publicly funded projects, including the Town Branch Commons Trail and Lexington's first nature-inspired splash pad called Splash at historic Charles Young Park. Peacher is committed to ensuring equity, transparency, and collaboration are at the forefront of each project that she manages, and is in pursuit of inclusive community growth and vitality. So yeah, thanks, Brandy, for being here. I guess let's see if I've got you as a co-host. Hold on just a minute. Brandy Peacher. Okay. Yeah, you should be good. You should be good to share your screen now, Brandy.
Okay, thank you. I will put that up. Are you seeing a slide deck there?
Yeah, see it.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brandy, as already mentioned, and I'm very excited to be here with you all and share a little bit about our project, the Town Branch Commons. It's been a long time coming, and I'm sure many of you on this call may have had some role in this project.
Every time I start doing it, I get distracted.
Hold on just a minute, let me mute somebody here.
That's fine. That's fine. That's just how these Zoom things go. I totally get it.
Yeah,
so let's see here. So like many communities, Lexington, we envision a network that connects people of all ages, abilities, so they have access to comfortable, convenient walking and biking routes, resulting in true mobility choice, which we believe, and I think you all too, that leads to improved economic opportunity and healthier lifestyles for all in the community. Town Branch Commons for us is a big step toward that goal. It's a transformative park and trail system in the heart of our downtown. Now, we all know it is a transportation project at the root of its core, but there's so much more to it that we try to incorporate into this project. We see it as a park, a linear park itself. And so this winding park and trail system roughly follows the path of Town Branch, which was Lexington's first water source, which today runs underground in a culvert. The system of Town Branch Commons includes continuous bike, walking paths, lush green band through downtown that connects to new and existing parks. And you mentioned that I'm working on a project called Splash, which is one of those parks in downtown. The project also improves water quality, addresses sanitary consent decree upgrades. And now that it's completed, we cut the ribbon in October of last year. We now have a contiguous 22-mile trail system throughout our county, and Town Branch Commons is the hub of that trail system. And of course, it's continuing to grow, and probably the 22 miles is already out of date and probably need to update that. So I mentioned Town Branch was historically where the city was founded, and it was this really the inspiration for our project as it was running through our downtown core. Historically, you know, the city was established upon the banks of that creek, but by the 20th century, a portion of that had been channelized and covered over in some areas due to flooding and growing public concerns. And most people don't even realize that it is still a water source that is running through downtown, but it's under their feet. And you can see here in the rural areas, it's a creek that everyone sees, but downtown, it's under the asphalt. But as you move west through downtown, it does reappear behind Rupp Arena in the parking lot, which is the site of the soon to be constructed Town Branch Park, a 10-acre park that will be another hub of our trail system and will be a true central park for our city. So a little background about how we got the design concept for Town Branch Commons. This project started over a decade ago, and under the administration of Jim Gray, who's now KYTC Transportation Secretary, that's when the project started. And so the city, in conjunction with our Downtown Development Authority and other partners, hosted an international design competition. And our community landed on a winning design concept developed by Scape Landscape Architects. And so this process was very important to the community because we engaged them in multiple levels. We hosted gallery openings so they could see all the submissions, and they voted and helped us get to our final selection of what we believed was the appropriate path for this downtown project. The concept that Scape provided to us, we thought was the best one that was available. One, it wasn't this just pie in the sky, huge, crazy dream where you open up all the roadways and show the river running through or put man-made water through the downtown core. Instead, they were more sensitive to our environmental components and our context. And so they integrated history, geology, ongoing development initiatives into the thread of our new public space as it moved through downtown. The Town Branch Commons itself is continuous for nearly 2 miles, running. We talk about it from east to west because of the trailhead as part of our overall trail system. And so the water infrastructure below ground was a huge component of these sections of the project. And that's what these diagrams show the four about carving, connecting, cleaning, and revealing. It's about how we use the water, how we interact with the water. And some of those concepts, this was their original proposal about 8 years ago. We were able to successfully integrate that into the project. What I thought was really nice about theirs is they looked at our context, our geology, our hydrology of the Kentucky Bluegrass region to inform their design. And rather than introducing that single daylet stream channel into the fabric of the city, they used the karst geology as inspiration for a series of water pools, pockets, channels that we could bring into the public realm at a small scale, while the culvert remained operational below ground, which is really necessary for a stormwater system. Many of these elements that they proposed would still tie into that performative and system. And we would also have ornamental water elements that would have visually distinct ways of illustrating this series of water components. So I think we're all very familiar that the existing street network in Lexington and many cities around the country were not designed with all users in mind when they were initially established. And we were, like many cities, we were affected in the 60s and 70s with the influx of motor vehicular traffic into our urban core. And these shifts in transportation had several unintended consequences, including dividing the downtown, creating inequities in both transportation and land use connectivity, and causing safety issues for all users due to more severe conflicts with faster moving cars. The corridor you're seeing here on the slide is Midland Avenue. And it truly has been a divide the entire life of its existence. First it was a water source, so you had water running through here. Then it was covered and it was a railroad. And then now today in this photograph, you see it's a 4-lane road that people drive way, way, way too fast on. And so our intent with Town Branch Commons was to integrate this in a whole system. And so that you could have all users represented and have a safe space for all of them. And so this then became a balanced, multi-layered approach, how we worked toward implementing Town Branch Commons. And so whether you're in a car, you're using public transportation, walking, biking, or we're looking at our environmental components of habitat, stormwater quality, and air quality and heat island, we purposefully tried to look at all of these equally, as they were all important to how our community is utilizing these. So this is just a quick section of what was Midland Avenue that you just saw a picture of. I'll tell you, it was a space that I never wanted to be, and I don't think many people utilize that corridor to walk or bike unless they had to. And being immediately adjacent to an underserved community, it was a corridor that needed to be established as a more significant walking, biking corridor to connect many people to jobs, to the downtown core, to the transit system. So the Town Branch Commons looked at road diet, just taking Midland down to much smaller lanes because they were huge. People were going 60 miles per hour or more. We caught them in sometimes, and utilizing right of way that we had by just reallocating the roadway space to one side of the road so that we could expand that environmental, native, adapted species area, stormwater components, and giving a dedicated multi-use pathway while also still dealing with the water quality components. The design, as I said, reflected what is iconically seen and known to be bluegrass. Had you come to downtown Lexington before, many people would come from the airport, get dropped off, and you're just in a concrete jungle. And so our intent was also to have this thread of bluegrass running through downtown. So getting some of these components that you see in the rural areas into the heart of our downtown along this corridor. Now the project is complete, as I said, and these are a few photographs of the final product. And this is Vine Street. In this section, the Town Branch Commons is expressed as a separate bike and pedestrian facility. And that way it can accommodate a denser utilization along this urban corridor. Paths are straightened and equally distribute space between the people, the water treatment zones, and planting areas. So everything that you see along the roadway a majority of this greenery are bioswales that are collecting water and treating that water. Additionally, along Vine Street, you have the section that is immediately across from our transit center. It was a space where people were just trying to get across Vine Street, 3-4 lanes of traffic, and there were no dedicated signalized crossings. So as part of this project, we were able to install a signal at each end of the transit center so that we could accommodate a significant pedestrian traffic that comes back and forth across Vine Street. One, for transit users, and two, it's a large parking structure that is housing a number of our downtown employees in this area. Also, as you continue on Vine Street, we were able to incorporate, of course, still the bike and pedestrian trails that are separated and given dedicated space. But also, as we narrowed the lanes in this corridor, we were also able to incorporate a series of overhead signage in order to direct traffic and get them to operate more efficiently through this corridor. It has helped tremendously, I will say that. And of course, as we continue on the corridor, there are opportunities that we've expanded the trail into plaza areas to accommodate resting, socialization, and then development may occur immediately adjacent to this plaza. And so we would work with those private developments in order to make those connections. Now on Midland Avenue, the Town Ridge Commons incorporates the meandering multi-use path rather than the separated paths. And so here it's shared by bicyclists and pedestrians, while also dedicating that significant space to express flow and treatment of water. While the project, as I said, is mostly known as transportation, I try as I continue to talk about this project to highlight the green infrastructure, because a lot of our community was like, oh my gosh, this project is spending so much money, and why? It's a sidewalk. And once I tell them everything that is below ground, that all the infrastructure that has been incorporated, that replaced impervious surfaces with nearly 2 acres of planting areas and bioswales along the corridor, I get a different reaction, and everyone starts to understand why this system is just as important environmentally as it is from a transportation standpoint. So here's a shot of one of these bioswales where it's collecting it from the roadway, channelizing that under the trail, and utilizing the adjacent bioswale to convey and filter millions of gallons of stormwater along this entire 2-mile corridor. As this is an urban project, as many of you all know who've worked in these environments, there are challenges. And for instance, along Vine Street, the top of the culvert structure that has been there since the 30s was inches below the surface of the existing driving surface. And it limited our ability to install the systems that we wanted to, the soil capacity along the road's edge. And also, unfortunately, we had an instance where when the contractor was demoing this section in order to begin to rebuild, they did cut through slightly the top of the culvert. So it's just all the utilities, all of the stormwater infrastructure. There's bound to be something that occurs. Now, granted, it was a minor cut, and we were able to make the repairs that would be appropriate to keep that infrastructure in place. So here, instead of directing all of the water directly into the bioswales, we're able to utilize flume structures to convey that water to the opposite side of the trail, just as I talked about on Midland Avenue. Here's a few more photographs and sections related to those bioswales that slow, filter, convey, and retain that stormwater runoff. And also we are incorporating native species of plantings and bringing much needed habitat space for pollinators and other species into town. Additionally, we have added to our urban tree canopy and included 3 times more trees along the Cambridge Commons corridor than was there before. Over 300 trees, I believe, were planted. And we have invested in the necessary infrastructure, such as tree soil cells that you see on this slide, to help support the healthy growth and longevity of the urban trees found in plazas and and then of course they're installed in the bioswales. I'm hopeful that this infrastructure will allow us to have much more mature trees in the long run in downtown, which we've struggled with for years as we've continued with our tree wells and installations with streetscapes in the past. This photograph I put in because I think it illustrates why we did this. Again, we still can convey the vehicular traffic along this corridor, but at the same time, we provided safe separation. We have incorporated the multi-use paths or separated paths in certain areas to accommodate walkers and bikers. But before, you would have never seen any of these folks on this corridor. And now we've got features such as you see this child playing in, it's a potable recirculating water source that is a fountain illustrating what the creek may have looked like. But also it shows and gives us the opportunity to illustrate what bioswales are. And we have signage out that helps explain that and educate the public. Education was a big component of this project, and that was from the get-go, from the community engagement at the very beginning, through the design process, and even into construction. That constant communication with the community via email, via texting, via the websites. I mean, we just pushed out information as much as we possibly could to give people updates on the project, to alert them of maybe impacts to their daily lives during construction, but also in the final product, we're able to still engage with our community with the physical signs that are installed to educate them about what the heck are these environmental components, what is this transportation network. And we have a website called the Town Branch Water Walk that you can visit, and there are videos and there's additional information to continue to educate the community. So I'll show this quick video and just kind of give an overview. Again, the Town Branches Commons is successfully linking our long divided community to one another in our central business district. And as you've seen, we've taken this layered benefits approach, which in turn allowed us the project to tap into multiple parallel funding sources that included federal transportation dollars reserved for transformational projects, local service transportation dollars, and focused stormwater improvement dollars. And I'll get into that funding here in just one second so you can see how we did make that happen. I did speak on just a minute ago about the education components of the project, but the community and stakeholder engagement was critical through this project. We were able to host events early on with public education campaigns, self-guided tours that allowed them to visualize the project and understand its importance and the history behind the town branch. As I said in the opening, this project has been more than a decade in the making. And I think we all know patience is key. But to be honest, I feel like 10 years is really fast for a project of this scale. And we're very proud of how we came from the beginning in 2012 with just an idea during our Rep Arena Entertainment District master plan, through the design competition and feasibility reports, all the way down to right-of-way acquisition phases, which we all know is a very fun phase, and then beginning the construction, which happened to be March of 2020. And I think we all know what happened then with the pandemic. But we had started, and our deadline utilizing Tiger funds was still in place, and our guys kept on moving. And in some instances, the shutdown kept more people off the roadways and allowed our construction crews to move quicker than they anticipated. So I mentioned the funding as being critical to the success of this project, and that is 100% true. We could not have done this without the federal grants, the state funds, utilizing Tiger, TAP, CMAQ, SLX, and KIA funds to make this project happen. The Tiger grant is really what gave us the, I think, the credibility within everyone's mind to say, wow, this project is really happening. And $14.1 million from Tiger Grant in 2016 is really what jump-started this project. We had close and frequent collaboration with sponsors necessary to coordinate with the different requirements and schedules of each of these programs. And what was so challenging was because of the different funding sources, and you can see on this map, each segment had different funding sources, which meant throughout construction, throughout design, even through billing and invoicing, we had to keep track of all of that for the different phases and submit that for our reporting and for our reimbursement requests through grants. That to me was the biggest administrative challenge that we had, was keeping track of all of these along this 2-mile corridor. Now, the project I focused on today was Town Branch Commons, which is the items in blue, but the funds that we received, the Tiger funds, were also utilized on Town Branch Trail 6, which is the yellow trail that runs through our distillery district. So the funds were able to do a lot more than just our 2-mile trail that I talk about. The agencies responsible for administrating these funds included FHWA, many of you here, the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, we had Division of Water at Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, the MPO with us, and then of course LFUCG, us being the primary lead for this effort. In an effort to improve efficiencies and advance common goals, the project development team partnered with the Division of Water Quality to upgrade our sanitary sewers along the route prior to beginning the trail construction. Common funding was secured. They also used the KIA loan, so we had a shared loan for phase 1 being the stormwater or the sanitary upgrade due to the consent decree, and then phase 2 of that loan was the trail green infrastructure components that was incorporated into this project. So then just a quick overview of the numbers. Tiger grant was 14.1 million. CMAQ grants was nearing 6 million. TAP grants a little over 2, and SLX 1 million, with also a $5.6 million KIA loan. Local funding was 11.85 million, and that was our pre-development as well as our match requirements for all of the grants. These grants were secured in partnership with the city, the MPO, our Downtown Development Authority. Everyone partnered to put in those applications and seek the money to make that happen. And I can't complete this project without acknowledging that a project of this size does not happen overnight. It does not happen through the work of one individual, one department or organization. And the list you see here is purely the short list. It doesn't begin to reflect all the efforts and project support from local, state, and federal levels. Public, private, and nonprofit partners included our project funding sources, or sponsors, I'm sorry, developers of neighboring projects, park boards, local community advocates, and state agencies. The project was developed in partnership with several local nonprofit organizations, and I've mentioned the Downtown Development Authority, but also our local Bluegrass Community Foundation, and others that have supported the project. These local organizations partnered with the city to develop or fund new parks and trails within the city, including that large Town Branch Park that I talked about earlier that starts construction this year and will be completed in 2025. And so collaborations with with all the agencies listed here, all the private partners listed here, ensured complementary project goals, a seamless user experience between adjacent projects, and coordinated access points and material palettes as we integrated everything together. So that collaboration and partnership was certainly key to the Town Branch Commons project. Community support was huge, cooperation with private developments and advancing our shared goals across multiple agencies facilitated not only a success for the Commons, but also achieved a victory for our community through the coalescence of multiple projects and events. We're proud of this effort and that has taken place to make this project a success. And as a representative of the mayor's office, I know we too are excited for what's to come for our community as a result of this significant civic investment. So thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, thanks, Brandy. Super cool presentation. It's fascinating to me, the bioswales and the bluegrass, threads of bluegrass and stuff, horses. Let's see, Bernadette's got a few questions on here. Just for clarification, Town Branch stream still below ground, and the water that can be seen are all water features.
Yes, so the Town Branch stream, the actual natural stream is still below ground in that culvert. And as I said, it reappears west of downtown. What water you will see as you walk along the corridor is all man-made potable recirculating water features, because we did want to have the experience of water along the corridor, but at the same time, we knew that the process and of bringing the stream to the surface was maybe not the most ideal approach. So we did take this man-made approach in order to get that experience.
Cool. And when is the park behind the Civic Center expected to be open?
So the park, which is, and I want to clarify about the park. It is also part of the Town Branch Commons, but it is all solely overseen, funded, constructed, and will be operated by a private entity. So the city is definitely a partner in establishing connectivity and assisting with permitting or what have you. But the park, the 10-acre park behind Rupp Arena, is set to break ground, I think, next month, and is anticipated to open in 2025. And so we have been very thankful to have that private partner to have tackled that big park component that was part of the original Town Branch Commons vision, while the city oversaw that transportation network.
Okay. Let's see, anybody else got any questions in the audience? I don't see any hands raised. Online chat. Let's see. We're about to go to break here, but did you say it was a national competition? How'd you?
Yes, our Downtown Development Authority at the time hosted an international design competition, so a call for concepts to be submitted to the city. And yeah, it was really cool. I happened to be the project manager at the Downtown Development Authority at the time. So somehow I have been with this project for 10 years since its concept to finish too, which is unique in and of itself. But it was a very, very fun experience to see what outsiders of our community thought we could do as well.
Okay, yeah, well, great presentation. Thanks so much for sharing with us, Brandy. And let's see. I don't see any other questions, so we'll go ahead and take a break here, guys. And if I get any other questions, I'll pass them on to you, Brandy. But yes, okay, we got one from Tom. Hold on.
If Brandy could expand a little bit on how the park will be maintained going forward.
See, how will the park be maintained? Who maintains it moving forward? Is Tom Hall out of Louisville?
Sure. So the system downtown, as I said, at the 2 miles, we've got 6 city-owned and operated parks, and they will oversee those as well as the trail. And our environmental services organization within the city will oversee all of the plantings, bioswales, and trees. The large 10-acre park at the end of the western Town Ranch Commons corridor will be 100% operated and maintained by that private entity, which is known as Town Branch Park Inc. So they are fundraising and continuing to figure out their system for that process.
Okay, yeah, good questions, good questions. Thanks so much. Let's give Brandy a round of applause. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure not only presenting, but working with a lot of you all on this project.
Yes, this one close to us, so I appreciate your time and
Come
effort.
on over. You can take a walk or a bike ride.
All right, yeah, thanks. Okay, guys, let's see, it's break time. Next presenter is on for 10:45, so take at least, 5-6 minutes, walk around, use the restroom, whatever you need to do. And meet back in here at 10:45, and we'll try to get going. Rob he said he can make the presentation in 10 minutes or so if we need a few extra minutes. So we'll see you back here at 10:45. Okay, let's see. Rob, you on here yet? Oh, Rob is here. Okay, he's in person.
This is Joe Hassman from FHWA. I guess you want me to go later?
Hey, Joseph, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. If you can come on at 11, I think because we got the carbon reduction 10:45 to take about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
11, is that okay?
Sure. I just was going off what the agenda said. That's fine.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we're looking forward to it for sure. And at 11, we'll start that. Yeah, and Rob's going to talk some carbon reduction here. Can we try to squeeze one in here for Rob Frazier? So we're going to get started with that. Everybody was on in person, kind of mingling. We're going to get started with Rob Frazier, carbon reduction program overview. So let's get see if we can get this thing shared. Is it going? Okay.
It's going.
And then share your screen, I think is all you got to do here. So yes, okay. Pull up the Zoom. Little blue thing right there. Pull that up. Let's see, maybe minimize. Yeah, sorry. There you go. Yeah, maximize this. There you go. Share screen. And pow. Or yeah, it might work. Yeah, okay. Go full screen. Yeah, it should work. And just minimize this. Yeah, see, we can see it. Good. Okay. Let me see. I got a bio for you, Rob. You can become a frequent speaker for us. I appreciate that. Rob's got 30 years experience in transportation engineering planning, degrees from Carnegie Mellon, University of California, Berkeley, HCR's transportation and planning technical lead for Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas. And yeah, he loves the STEAM education initiative, helping a group of students in Louisville achieve their full potential. So with that, Rob, go ahead and share your presentation, carbon reduction program. Over.
All right, thank you. And so everyone can hear me here and hopefully online.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. I am going to keep this short. This got kind of inserted as essentially a 10-minute quick session on the carbon reduction program, which is a new program that came out with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so the agenda is to go over the program, just talk about funding, eligible activities, and then the state is responsible for putting together a carbon reduction strategy. So we'll talk a little bit about that. For some of you, you are either becoming familiar with this, may have sat in on a session on this. So some of this may not be new to some of you, but I think for a lot of folks, it's a new program to get to learn about and figure out. It is, as you see on the slide here, around $112 million for Kentucky over the 5-year life of the bill. And the purpose is to reduce CO2 transportation emissions, which if you see the footnote there, it's transportation emissions in the guidance specifically say it's defined as carbon dioxide emissions from on-road highway sources. So that is the focus. And these are the funding allotments for Kentucky for the first 2 years of the program. And there are around 5 million for the MPOs of that are over 200,000 people, and it's around 23% of the total. And then there's an allotment for sub-allocation for the 50 to 200,000 MPOs, just under 1 million. And then there are portions that are sub-allocated to areas that have smaller populations, and those are proportioned out as shown. And then there's 35% that can go anywhere in the state. So that is how the funding breaks out. Again, it's 112 overall, with a little over 20 million, 22 million every year. It's 80-20 with a few exceptions, and 3 years to obligate the funds after the end of each, after the end of the fiscal year. So these are the sub-allocation amounts for Kentucky's MPOs. And those MPOs are all kind of aware of this and working with this and figuring out how to program. Some have already programmed some of this money. But those are the first 2 years sub-allocation, and the population amounts that were used for that sub-allocation. I don't know if that's going to change. You heard some discussion earlier today about moving to the 2020 census and various things. So those possibly could be adjusted. This is a map that shows the areas that those funds, the sub-allocation amounts match up with. So we've got the larger MPOs, the 50 to 200 MPOs, and then the rest of the state is broken up as shown. So there's quite a bit of our population that is not in kind of an urbanized area, and therefore, gets that fourth pot of sub-allocated money. All right, the eligible activities, the capital projects, the one right there in the middle. So it's all the projects we talk about frequently here in this room, but it's also well, let me rephrase that. Sorry, it's the use of the transportation system. So it's people out driving and using the system, but it's also the capital projects. So it's the construction of those projects. It's also the operations and maintenance of those projects. And so I'll just throw out, listen to someone from Tennessee talk about they're actually working to switch some of the equipment they use to electric. So battery powered, trimmers, et cetera. So just as part of this. So it's the full range. I will say that the bulk of CO2 emissions come from the use of the system, not from the other two, but they're all eligible activities. Wide range of projects. This funding can be used for a wide range of projects as long as they reduce transportation emissions. And so here is a single slide that shows a fairly wide range of projects. We have, so just let you look at this. I'm not going to read this, but take a look at it. Some of the ones that are in kind of the bolder blue there are ones that, as we have talked to MPOs across the state, folks have said, yeah, this is something that we are either doing or would like to do or considering. And but you can use it for the ones in gray as well. There's just a wide range of things that would be eligible. And I will say, they're looking to no capacity increases, but anything that it would reduce CO2 emissions is eligible. So there's some pretty interesting things on here. All right. As part of this, we also have to prepare a carbon reduction strategy. And so that strategy is due in November to FHWA. And there is a desire to see this kind of incorporated into the larger planning process and the other documents that we prepare. And it's to be done in coordination with the MPOs. So we've had meetings with each of the MPOs, and we'll have some additional follow-up meetings. That's directly right out of the guidance. And then just the second to last one, must consider the population density and the context. They really emphasize that each state's going to have a unique approach to this. And as I look at different states and what they're doing, they are in fact coming up with different approaches unique to kind of each state and its own goals and context. So just a quick snapshot of Kentucky's transportation sector emissions over time. And you can see kind of the long-term trend here. This is from Energy Information Administration. It's part of the EPA. And so that is kind of the long-term trend. So this is kind of the baseline that we are setting as part of this strategy document. We've got the total on-road CO2 emissions. And you can see in this slide kind of where, which county, this is just plotted by county. So which counties have the most emissions. And then this slide shows those same emissions on a per capita basis per person. And you see that the interstates are contributing a lot to that. So if you have a small population, and you have an interstate running through there, that pops up. So we've got a lot of information, but we need to be careful about how we use and interpret that. And don't draw the wrong conclusions. So I know Gallatin County, for example, pops up because of I-71 running through it and it not having a large population base. So it's just interesting ways to look at the data. We have quite a bit of data. We've got the traffic data. We've got traffic data by for trucks versus autos, and we've got quite a bit of different information to look at as to where emissions are coming from and what the reasons and sources are. This is CO2 emissions, another way to look at it, divided by the daily vehicle miles traveled. So again, another thing that shows the interstates really do play a major role, and then truck emissions. And so trucks play an outsized role. They have substantially more emissions per mile traveled than light duty vehicles. So that is another piece of the puzzle that, as we just set the baseline, we want to just put the information out there so that everyone has a good understanding of what is driving it and where and why. So the strategy is it's again November. We have to be done, so we really need to be done. I'll show you a schedule here in the next slide. We're going to be done well in advance of that, but we're setting the baseline. So data I just showed you, and some other information as well, and then goals and objectives, working through that. So we're working on those first two buckets there, and then identifying project category strategies. What are all the things that are eligible, and then how will things ultimately get programmed, and then write the strategy document. So all in consultation with the MPOs and various agencies. So that is the strategy development. Here's the schedule. So really we have less than two months to have a draft document, a little less. And we're kind of working rapidly through this. So that is the very high level overview. Justin Harrod is the primary contact here at the cabinet, and he is the back, and then my contact information is there as well. And hopefully that was close to 10 minutes.
Good job, Rob. That was super cool overview. And let's see, anybody have any questions for Rob on congestion carbon reduction program? I don't see any hands raised. I got one question from Tom. Look at the draw.
Question is do you have to have that plan in place before you can authorize any of the money?
You have to have the plan in place before you authorize the money.
This is unlike the electric vehicle situation where they needed to have the plan before the money could be, was really ours. This you have to have a plan, but the money is already ours, and folks have programmed it in some areas and things. So I think the money can already be spent. In fact, given the 3-year time frame, it's good to move forward with the early year money.
When did it become available?
If that makes sense. Is that just anything to add to that, or? Yeah.
I was also going to ask another question. I guess MPOs don't have to have a separate carbon reduction program plan?
Do MPO
Covered under this statewide umbrella? That's why you're talking about the coordination.
Yes.
MPOs need a separate plan?
Yeah. So the question is, do MPOs have to have their own plan or separate plan? And they do not have to. They are certainly can. There is the guidance specifically encourages MPOs to integrate this though into kind of what they're doing. So they can bring it into their other planning processes, but they don't have to have a separate plan. Some do across the country, but they don't have to.
You go ahead.
I have a little voice. This may be a question more for KYTC. Are areas that have sub-allocated CARB monies eligible for the statewide pot? Do you expect that will be done through like a competitive grant process? And if so, will that likely be through the Office of Local Programs or through a different arm of KYTC?
Yeah, so one thing.
Good question. Go ahead. Yeah, good question. You go ahead.
They're meeting with leadership next week. And that's some of the things that we'll be talking about is how to handle the other portion that the state charge of. so don't know the answer right now, but it probably will be done.
Justin was saying they got a meeting with leadership next month. Next week. Okay, next
Yeah,
week.
no, that's why I pulled up the
So that's-
schedule. I mean, we kind of met with all the MPOs at the very end of June, and we're here now, and as quickly as we could, we got a meeting set up. And so we're
Yeah.
moving rapidly. So to be able to answer those questions in more detail, that's where we are working through that.
We mainly wanted to make sure to understand what it is the MPOs were doing. That's what the meetings back in June were. Of course, we have our meeting next week, that really being able to understand how the
Okay, yeah, thanks, guys. Round of applause for Rob. Thank you, Rob. Short notice, got that meeting in there, got that presentation in there. Okay, let's see, last speaker today. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Hausman, Joseph
All right,
Hausman.
you can call me Joe.
Joe, okay, thanks for your patience,
Yeah.
Joe. Joe is he's worked for over 36 years in the public sector at the local, state, and federal levels. First as a transportation planner with the Franklin County Engineers Office in Columbus, Ohio. And next, he was a roadway information manager for Ohio Department of Transportation. He was responsible for managing, the state's roadway databases and GIS maintenance. And for the past 14 years, Joe has worked at FHWA headquarters in Washington, D.C. The first 7 years in the Office of Policy, for the last 7 years, he's been the senior community planner in the Office of Planning. Currently, he's managing the Major Polluted Fund Study at UGIST and is the FHWA liaison to the CTPP. Is coordinating the functional classification urban boundary adjustment process along with other planning research. Running data projects analysis. Joe has a BA degree in geography and a master's degree in city and regional planning, both from the Ohio State University. So with that, go ahead, Joe. And thanks for
All right. No, thank you. Does everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, let me hear you good.
All right, thank you. So a little bit about myself again. I'm Joe Hausman with the state of Ohio for many years in Ohio DOT. In fact, visited many times to Frankfurt over the years. First, when we were doing some enterprise database systems and GIS, we looked at what you were doing in Kentucky, and also to look at some of your other programs you had over the years. So a little bit like going home, even though I'm from Ohio, it's just right across the river. And my mom, she's from Portsmouth, Ohio, which is across the river. And then I have to kind of dedicate this to my mother-in-law, who's 90 years old, and she's from Bellevue, Kentucky. So I have a lot of Kentucky ties. Anyway, what we're going to talk about today is the adjusted urban area boundary process that FHW allows states to do. But we also we talk about functional classification as well, because functional classification, and they both kind of go hand in hand. Every 10 years, the census releases a new set of urban area boundaries that impacts the functional classification. So it's kind of a big time to review a state's functional classification. Again, we do them together. We're going to go over functional classification first, then we're going to go over adjusting the urban area boundaries. And one of the big things about the boundaries is, what do we see? What are the problems that states come up with when we review those? And I should mention the division office at FHW has the authority to approve the functional classification and urban area boundary changes that you submit to them. Functional classification is often an ongoing process because roads get built, roads change, and urban areas change and things like that. So it's a kind of a living thing. And boundaries generally only 10 years. Why adjust them in between? And we'll talk about that as well. So if you're not familiar with our guidance, this is what it looks like, and it's available on our website at the link below. It was done about 10 years ago. I did this when I used to be in the Office of Policy. I worked on the HPMS team, and we looked at functional classification urban area boundaries as data. All the data at federal highways that's submitted to Congress, highway statistics, things like that are all based on urban versus rural. And FHWA uses the adjusted urban area boundary in all of its performance measures and everything we do to determine whether a road's eligible for federal aid or not. And this really impacts the minor collectors quite a bit. For example, a rural minor collector is not eligible for the federal aid program, while an urban minor collector is. So as you move boundaries in and out, that can affect those roads. But anyway, we did a fairly major research project on this about 10 years ago. And since I was on the HPMS team for 7 years, I know HPMS about as well as anybody. So if you have any comments or questions about that, I can help there too. But anyway, we looked at it as data items, and we went through this, and we kind of wanted to update what had been done in the past. This has the same name as the previous guidance that we did on this topic. We just wanted to improve it and modernize it. If you're familiar with the older guidance we had before this was, I believe, released in the early 80s, maybe 1980, as I recall. But it was nothing more than slapping a new cover on an old guidance that was developed in the 1960s. So none of the functional classification, urban area boundary, et cetera, had been looked at since then. Back in 2008, we did some interim updates. The big thing we did then, if any of you deal with coding functional classification for federal aid submittal information like the HPMS, in 2008, we decoupled the collectors, and we also added in information where you could put an urban, another freeway expressway, not only in the urban area, which had always been available to do, but also on the rural side, so we could have some balance. And then you could have major and minor collectors in the urban area. It used to be only had collectors. And no matter you break them out, all collectors in the urban area are eligible for the federal aid program. Again, on the rural side, the minor collectors are not. So, and we wanted to get more into the concepts. We wanted to look at new data. Functional classification is primarily based on AADT and also based on the percentage of the overall road network. Our research, and can someone mute there's somebody that's not muted. It's making some noise. Yeah, maybe it's the podium. Anyway, we used to have, gosh, I'm forgetting how many we had. We had 13, I think 13, 12 or 13 classifications broken out in urban and rural in the old system. Now we have 7 urban, 7 rural. And those, this is how they're coded into HPMS, is what the numbers for, or how the federal or FHWA looks at them. But they have the same names they've always had. Again, adding OFEs or other freeway expressways on the rural side, and then adding minor collectors to the urban side, breaking those out into 2 types of collectors. Anyway, so we wanted to talk about how and where you use functional classification. We wanted to keep the terms the same that we've used for the last 50 years or so on functional classification, or almost 60 years, I should say. I think it was introduced in the 60s. And again, I've already talked about the OFE minor, major collectors, et cetera. And also mobility and access. Functional classification has always been about mobility and access, and maybe less so today with things like traffic calming and how traffic influences communities. And we don't want to just say, be the most efficient on traffic if it destroys communities. So anyway, these are some of the things we get in that. And also we took a really deep dive into the mileage and VMT distribution ranges across functional classification. So what's changed since the 1960s? Well, I think all of you know a lot has changed. The federal aid system is mature now. Decision-making and coordination is higher than I think it used to be. This meeting is a good example. You can do an online meeting for the most part. Everybody can get together and talk about what they do. There's just a lot more coordination and decision making. Geospatial technologies, or GIS. I fancy myself a GIS expert, especially in the area of linear referencing. This is really developed over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Started, in the 60s, developed out in the 70s. Most people don't realize that states like Ohio and Wisconsin started their GIS LRS programs in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Kentucky was an early adoption of a lot of this information. They used something called Oracle for Highways. If you're familiar with that, you may still be using that, though I don't think it really exists anymore. It was went into a company called Exor, and that's been absorbed by Bentley. I'm not sure where you are on that, but I know that Kentucky was an early adopter of this technology. And options of roadways have increased. Often, like I said before, it was access versus mobility. It's not that way anymore. And also we have the whole phenomenon of complete streets. We need to look at all the things that impact the roadway network that are non-auto. You know, there's different modes involved. Bike and ped's a good example of that. So, you know, the pictures here are kind of obvious. And one thing you got to understand about functional classification, it's a bit of an art. You know, a principal arterial in New York City or in Los Angeles is not the same as in maybe a rural area in Kentucky, right? Or a small city in Kentucky. And so you have to kind of take a look at those, how this stuff all fits together from a planning perspective. We do a lot of guidance here. We do a lot of guidelines on how you can determine that. But again, at the end of the day, you're going to get to a point where you can kind of look at these roads and decide how they impact a certain community and how they operate. So, you know, we also get into, we went through HPMS about 10 years ago, and we came up with VMT ranges for different types of roadways. And it worked out pretty well. We broke the country into urban and rural states. And what we found is that the country naturally breaks down into urban and rural states if you say 75% of the population lives or doesn't live in an urban area. And that broke the country about, you know, 50-50. So that's what we did. If you're 75% or more of your population lives in an urban area, we consider it an urban state. We broke out statistics for that and also the rural states. So something new that we tried to do to give states more ideas on how they should classify a road. Again, a lot of it based on VMT. Future roads. One thing we've seen at FHWA, I used to see this in Ohio when I managed the road network, is roads would slip in, proposed routes or future routes would slip into the program and they'd be there for 20 years and nothing would ever happen to them and they just clog things up. And they can be functionally classified as well. You can classify an unbuilt road, but today we want to tie it to something like the STIP, which means it's actually going to be built in the next 4 or 5 years. And also another thing that came about in the last go around was, this came out of HPMS, that grade separated ramps and interchanges will be functionally classified as the same as the highest level facility within the interchange, which means that if you have an interstate and say a US route that are part of the interchange, all the ramps would take on the interstate classification. How do you make the decisions on how you're going to rate a highway? Well, we thought a decision tree would be a good idea. You look at all the roads in the state or in your region, whatever you're rating, and then you break them out in, well, is this an arterial, non-arterial? And then you have to come down and see if it's a principal arterial or a collector, local, et cetera. So, you know, there's a pretty logical way to do this. The way I did this the last time I was involved in the state was we sat down with the GIS folks and we sat down with the database folks, all the road people, and we locked them up in a room for about 3 months and said, let's go through all the entire system and rate these roads for the state highway system. And where we see changes in local roads, let's do some automation there to do that, and then give it out to the local governments and the MPOs to essentially throw darts at that. This is the old chart. I used to have a cross through this, but I took it out. This is kind of the way that we've always looked at this, that, local roads have less mobility, unrestricted access, lots of curb cuts, things like that, as principal arterial interstates have none of that, and they're really designed for longer distance, though we do see in a lot of urban areas that's really not the case anymore. There's a lot more interchanges than there used to be, and a lot less cross area transportation. There's a lot more, within the city or the urban area, but overall, that's what they're supposed to do. And one thing I want to mention about the principal arterial, other freeway expressways, those are essentially interstate lookalikes. Now, not always though. On the rural side, a lot of times you'll see these as mostly grade separated roadways and facilities with a few at grades. Maybe you have a major road that has a traffic light on it every so often. So, but in general, they're interstate lookalikes. Maybe not built up to quite interstate standards. The idea of mobility, this is a tunnel in Colorado, right? It's perfect mobility. You can't get in and out of that. And hopefully you won't get in a crash or anything in one of those, because first day I was at FHWA, I was in a meeting, and with the tunnel guys, I said, well, don't ever get in a crash in a tunnel. You're toast if you do. So anyway, this is the idea of perfect mobility. And the ideal perfect access, there's no through traffic on a cul-de-sac, right? It's only for local access. So these are each end of the spectrum as far as access and mobility. So what influences functional classification? Trip length. Longer trips generally involve more principal arterial use. Once you get out of your neighborhood, and you're going to go to the other side of a city or county or other part of the state or even the country, you're most likely going to do that on a principal arterial, often interstate or other freeway, expressway, things like that. Shorter trips tend to be more, more in the neighborhood. Maybe you're seeing a friend. You're going to be on either a local road or possibly a minor or major collector. Curb cuts, access points. I've already mentioned that. The more curb cuts and access points, the more traffic's inhibited, the less longer distance usually. So these all impact how you functionally classify a road. Other factors are speed limit, route spacing. Usually you won't have a lot of principal arterials that are parallel to each other. You need to pick one, maybe the other one's a little bit less, and you move it down to either a minor collector or a local or a major minor collector, or possibly a minor arterial. Traffic volume, probably the biggest thing you need to look at is how many vehicles are on this particular road, number of lanes. Connectivity to activity centers is important too. Do you have a major traffic generator like I don't know, like a major sports venue or something like that? So one of the things that we talk about, some of you may remember this under map 21, in general, principal arterials are an interconnected system. You don't want to dump a principal arterial into a local road because that just doesn't make sense. Going from an ADT of 20, 30,000, whatever it is, down to 100 or a couple hundred or 1,000. So generally they're in an interconnected system, and you don't want to dump higher level facilities into lowers unless there's a reason. And there can be a reason, like you run out of the country, you hit the ocean, that might terminate a principal arterial. Or I can think of a few interstates off the top of my head. There's one in DC that terminates in the city, but they're very few and far between. Essentially an interconnected system of principal arterials so that traffic doesn't come to a standstill. So what do principal arterials do again? Urban, and this was all new guidance. Again, we were trying to break out urban versus rural. In urban, again, longer trips, higher proportion of traffic. They interconnect major areas within the city at some distance. And they also connect communities. If you're old enough to remember the old federal aid primary system, that's essentially what they did on the rural side. They connected the major population centers, and the interstates were part of that. On the rural side, principal arterials are even more so that way. Since the road network isn't as dense, you're going to have a lot more roads that move people over longer distance and across the rural area because not many people live there. And so they really they tend to connect urbanized areas or towns. By the way, mention urban clusters here in this slide. They don't exist anymore under the new census boundary, urban area boundary information. There are only urban areas, nothing else. We'll get to that later. And also, they're integrated. So again, think about a rural area. They're gonna be interconnected with other principal arterials. Minor arterials, the same sort of thing, but a lesser level. They don't go quite as far. They don't have as much traffic. The geographies that they serve may be, a little bit within the city, possibly from one area of town to one of the other, depending on the size of the city or the area you're dealing with. And they tend to provide more land access than the principals, but they're still the major streets. They still have a lot of ADT. On the rural side, still sort of linking the towns and area, but there might be areas within the rural area that these are linking that are either smaller towns or smaller areas that need to be serviced. Major collectors, you think about these, if you're in a neighborhood in an urban area, these are kind of the larger roads within your neighborhood that collect up from the smaller collectors or local roads. And they may go for some distance. They carry more ADT than the lower ones. On the rural side, these are probably more your farm to market roads. They're a little bit bigger than the local roads you're serving these rural areas, but You know, it's just a tree, you're triaging the traffic and everything as you go down. These things are just, they just have become more local in nature. Minor collectors, again, on the, I can't overemphasize this, on the rural side, a minor collector is not eligible for federal aid. On the urban side, all collectors are eligible for federal aid. In fact, when we implemented this in the 2008 document I mentioned earlier, they, states didn't have to develop major and minor collectors within the urban area, since all of them are eligible for federal aid. But a lot of states did, because it makes sense to have, there's a pretty big difference between a major and a minor collector. Major collector, of course, is a lot bigger. Minor collectors, you really get down more into the neighborhood level. A major collector can serve a lot more traffic and can serve a lot more distance. So a lot of states like that extra breakout for these. So just to give you an example, and I'm sure most of you know how they look, right? We know what urban areas look like. You know, they're dominated by a core city with often a grid pattern road network with maybe a loop or an outer belt. They have interstates that run through them, a lot more density and population and land use. And they also often have, they look this way because there's often a lot more land use controls through the planning process. Rural area networks a lot less diverse, a lot more spread out. They're mostly serving local, just a lot less roads, a lot less variety and density, land use, and less zoning control. So they look like the lower picture in the green. So HPMS, by the way, is undergoing a revision right now to HPMS 9. They've been kind of struggling with that since it's such a big departure from what they've done in the past. But in the older HPMS 8, you can make functional class maps on the fly. And I wanted to pull this one up. This is from Boston. So we're in an urban area here, a large urban area. But you can see all the functional classifications and how they kind of naturally break out. The interstates are in blue. The principal arterial OFEs, other freeway expressways, are purple. The principal arterials other than those two are red. Minor arterials are the thick black line. The major collectors are the kind of that beigey brown line. Minor collectors are green. And you'll see there's no minor collectors in this map because I don't believe Massachusetts developed minor collectors in the urban area like I mentioned earlier. And of course, the lighter gray color are the local roads. And what you'll notice is that most roads are local, right? They don't rise to the level of federal aid. And that's on purpose. And you'll say they did a good job here. Not a lot of parallel routes. They're interconnected. They're doing what we expect them to do. So when our division offices reviews your submittal, they should see something like this, some sort of GIS produced product that has good spacing, it makes sense, it ties into the population, does what we've been talking about. So when you rate a road, what are you going to do? Common sense should be a guide. Most planners have a feel for this after a while, especially after you look at hundreds and hundreds of roads, you get an idea what's a principal arterial, what's a minor arterial, et cetera. And so, you get an art to this, and we're going to go over breakouts on ADT in a minute, but, the real problem is in these overlapping areas where the roads, it's kind of hard to decide what to do. And you just need to make a call on that. You need to just maybe have to do a little deeper thought. If it's on the state highway system, you might have to look at Photolog or other resources you have to really understand how this road operates. Maybe talk to local folks. So a lot of times when you're sitting in the state capitol, you might not know. So local knowledge is always good. It's always good to collaborate. And by the rule here is that the MPOs are the authority within the urbanized areas. And local government should always be consulted when you're rating roads. And also think about community standards and how they look at their roads. This is a big guide to what you want to do. So typical characteristics. So what are we looking for here? So when you look at a road, you want to look at the lane width. You want to look at the inside and outside shoulder width if it's divided. Outside shoulder only if it's undivided. You want to look at the ADT in the urban versus rural areas, whether it's divided or undivided, whether it's fully controlled. Fully controlled, of course, means that there's only access at grade separated interchanges. It really doesn't have to be grade separated because I know there are some that aren't, but for the most part, FHWA is only concerned with grade separated ramps. That's what's submitted into HPMS. And you know, these are the different classifications through the arterials. And you can see the characteristic that we saw throughout the country. This is all based on HPMS analysis on the nation as a whole. So this is kind of what you see. On the rural side, we're talking here about mileage and VMT and what kind of characteristics you see typically on these kind of roads. So, you know, you would look at this and say, oh, okay, this road falls into this category. Again, on the urban side, the same sort of thing. These are mileage and VMT extents for the state. So these are the collectors and local information. As you can see, the roads are getting narrower. There's less shoulders. There's less ADT. We broke it out in urban and rural here, so you can see that, and divided and uncontrolled, controlled information. Just more of the same stuff. This is the percentages across the state. Remember, the way this should be done, in my opinion, is you go through all the roads in the state. Okay, you have to do this one time. I'm sure it's been done many times in Kentucky. When you come into this time, we're going to look around the edges. We're going to look at how the road's interacting with the urban and rural environment, and then reclassify the road based on that, if necessary. And one difference from the old way this was done back in I think it was 2000. Yeah, it was the last time we had functional classification incorporated the rural and urbanness of the road. You had to actually change the classification right at the boundary. You don't have to do that anymore because we look at it as kind of a fuzzy boundary. You need to change the functional classification of a road where these characteristics that we're showing you right now change once you go out of the urban area or into the urban area. So those are the kind of things you're needing to look at. And so when you rate all the roads, you're going to run statewide statistics on them, and they should fall into these statewide numbers that we're showing right now. So what makes functional classification change? So, you know, I think I've mentioned this before, but if you build a new road or you have an older road that's been widened because for whatever reason, you know, to alleviate congestion, whatever the reason is, it feels more like an arterial now, or it went from a local to a collector. This happens quite a bit. Again, this is a living thing. It could change, you know, all the time. In fact, what we would do when I was in the Ohio DOT was we'd collect these up for 3 or 4 months, and we would meet with the division, and then we would show them all the changes that came in. And what you'll notice here, this is all about real changes to the road. It's not about trying to fund a project. So, you know, you want to rate these roads on how they operate. You don't want to change functional classification to put something on the federal aid program just to get it funded. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to plan to fund, not fund to plan, is what I like to say. So these are the kind of things you need to watch out for. Watch how the VMT or the traffic's changing. Has a road been extended, widened, you know, bypassed? There's all kinds of things that go on in the network that you need to keep an eye out for. So why do we use GIS? Well, if you're not aware of it, the entire FHWA essentially uses linear referencing systems. Now, for those of you who don't know what LRS is, it's if you go out and look on a local interstate that goes through your state, you'll see a mile marker. That's an LRS. You're on interstate such and such at mile marker 10. If you know data that matches that, let's say you have a crash at mile marker 10, you can associate that through a database join to the GIS and make a map out of it. The real advantage here is very scalable. You can take hundreds of thousands of crashes a year and map them instantly if you follow the business rules of route ID and measure. Route ID being what road it is, measure being the distance from the beginning to the end. And LRS essentially does a percentage along that roadway to locate the crash or any other thing you're trying to identify. Again, HPMS is done that way at FHWA. FEMAS is compared to that. If you're putting in projects for federal aid programming, they go into a program system or accounting system called FEMAS. FEMAS checks against HPMS to see what kind of road it is and other information about it. And also to map the project. So something to keep in mind is you need to understand LRS. It's the language of highways. The NBI has information for that. They've been working on putting more LRS data for location of the structures. I'm not sure where they are on that right now, but hopefully that will be that way. Our safety program with Meyer and other things are linked back to the LRS. So there's a whole lot of it going on at FHWA, and every state is required to develop an LRS and submit their data that way for all public roads in the nation. So when I say all public roads, HPMS is set up so that higher level facilities have more information and lower level facilities have lesser information. And the thing you have to remember is that in 2026, Meyer FDEs are coming, and the Meyer FDEs will require data to be located on a network. And HPMS is working on being able to do that as well for the Meyer FDEs. So, you know, when you use GIS, you're looking for certain things visually too, like does the road connect? Does the functional classification connect correctly? Are you dumping a principal arterial into a minor collector or something, which you shouldn't do, or you're gonna have a big bottleneck. So it gives you a way to check through the data. And a lot of times data sits in databases for years and years. And until you map it, you don't know how good it is. And most states in the country by now are way past that. So almost all the roads have been mapped. And I know in Kentucky, since you guys are so technically capable, that I'm sure these kind of things don't exist too much. Travel demand models, in my opinion, humble opinion, I would think that most states would want to develop their travel demand and forecasting models on top of the state's LRS. That way they achieve data integration to enterprise systems, which is another thing I work on. That's really a topic for another day. And so editing, visualization, and all that are why we use GIS, and also the capability of referencing data by only this location on the earth is the real power of GIS. And we also put out a timeline. We tell the states you have about 24 months to do the functional classification. The reason for this is that we want to get when we report to Congress from FHWA, we want everybody to be on the same page when it comes to the urbanness or ruralness of their system and their functional classification program. And what we saw in the past is that some states would do it in a year or two, and other states would do it 7 or 8 years down the road. So our federal aid data would be all over the place. And this has become more important as we've developed performance measures and things like that at FHWA. Some good ideas are to elevate the importance of this into the DOT, create a multi-agency review team, get MPOs and other players involved, build a game plan, an enterprise approach. Today we're going to generate maps and share electronically. When this slide was done some years ago, that wasn't quite as common, but today it is. So use all GIS to do this. When I first started doing this, we actually still were drawing the maps by hand on ink on Mylar. So we've come a long way since those days. And try to keep it on time. Now, one thing I want to mention here is that the state I came from, we like to do it all. And what we would do is we build the urban area boundaries. Okay, get those where we thought they were reasonable through some formula. I'll talk about that later. And then we would send those out to the MPOs and local governments to essentially throw darts at and bring that local knowledge into play. But if you were happy with it, you didn't have to do anything. If you weren't, but you had time to modify and get it back to the state, and it was all electronic. So just something to note that let's try to keep a schedule, take this approach where you have policy on how to do it, and do the update to the functional classification in 24 months. And you'll notice on the top of this slide, this is after the boundaries approved, and we're going to get to the boundaries in a minute. And we also came up with a legend example for the functional class and the colors that should be used. So this is all online. It's all in our documentation. Take a look at this. And by the way, we're in the process of updating this information right now, our guidance, because since it was originally done, FHWA web-based information has to be 508 compliance. That means it's the colors are a certain way, the displays are a certain way, the whole website's designed so that it's easy to read and people with disabilities can see it and understand it. So we're working on that right now. But again, our guidance is good. Just ignore any talk about urban clusters because they don't exist anymore. So now we're going to get into the urban area or urban rural definitions. You can see that obviously the picture on the left is an urban area, and on the right, well, that's not so urban. Though that sometimes these can be deceiving. That could be around the edges or something, right? So, but generally, it's pretty obvious. And we have a link in here. This is a website that we have where we publish all our information about census issues, timelines, MPO information, stuff like that. This is a little dated at this point, but this gives you the idea on the timeline on the urban areas when they were developed and when they were released. Bottom line on all this is that the urban area boundaries were released from the Census Bureau on December 29th, 2022. And this was all the information that led up to it. They do Federal Register notices on their proposed criteria. Then they come out and they talk about that they're going to propose them. Then they do propose them, and then they work on them and they come out at some point. They were about, I don't know, it was December 29th, 2022, and 2012 they came out in March. So what's that? 8-9 months later. This was all because of COVID and lack of staffing at the Census Bureau. But hopefully next time we won't see this. This has caused some issues with the timing, but the boundaries official release through the Federal Register notice was on December 29th, 2022, which means that the urban area boundaries should be adjusted within a year on December 29th, 2023. The clock is running on this. Our division office should be working with the state on that. So, used to be, we talked about urban clusters. Urban clusters had a population of 2,500 to 50,000. Okay, FHWA never considered the 2,500 to 5,000 urban clusters as urban. We ignored those. We considered those rural. From 5 to 50,000, those were called small urban areas. Those are, and then from 50,000 and above were urbanized. 50,000 and above require MPO coverage. Above 200,000 in population is a TMA, which brings its own own responsibilities and reviews by FHWA. Those don't exist anymore in the census. They start the urban areas at approximately, and I say approximately 5,000. They've, and we'll get to this more, but in this go around, they started using housing density to develop the urban areas. We don't pay attention to that. We only pay attention to the population. So each urban area comes with an attached population, whether it was developed, well, they were all developed from the density information, but we only look at the ones that are 5,000 above. So we're consistent with what we've always done. We always look at 5,000 above. You could have a few urban areas that are less than 5,000 in population because they were developed from cluster data. So they look at a certain density, 2,000 houses equal 5,000. That's assuming an average of 2.5 people per household. That's where they come up with 5,000. Again, it could be less than that. So again, if you have an urban area with less than 5,000, we consider that rural. Housing unit density, we talked about that. Census block and census trace and block define urban area cores. That's not really that important for this, but they did some changes on how they identify cores of the urban areas. Reduce the maximum jump distance to 2.5 miles to 1.5 miles. This has impacted a lot. It's separated outlying regions of urban areas into their own urban area in some cases, or made them rural, et cetera. So, this is kind of the summary of what's changed in the new urban area development or delineation this go around. Another thing they did that caused some problems across the country is LEHD worker flow data. When you have these large urban agglomerations with more than one urban area, where do you place the boundary between them? Like in New York City, like in Chicago, Atlanta, some of these really big urban areas. How do you do that split? Well, they wanted to look at where people were living and working to do that. I've already talked about this quite a bit. The urban area definition in 2010 was like this, 2,500 and above. And then again, FHWA only looked at 5,000 and above. And down here on the lower level, this is the census definitions, 5,000 population or 2,000 housing units. No more urban clusters, no more urbanized areas. FHWA will determine the urbanized areas for our purposes and also the TMAs. And this is just breaking out the difference between what went on in the and how they do some of the urban area core information and low density fill information. It is what it is. It's how the Census Bureau did it. The Census Bureau is being driven by data perturbation and privacy, differential privacy to be exact. They're required by law to make their data so that it doesn't release private information. And so that's why they're doing this. They don't want to have less accurate data, but what they want to do is try to get to the same information without being able to decompose the data back to an individual. So we're going to see more perturbation. We're going to see more of this sort of thing going on. So that's really why they did this. They also felt that if they used housing data, they could do more updates more often if needed, but I haven't heard of them really doing that yet. Let's see here. So again, about the housing density, I've said this, I got ahead of myself a little bit, but I'll go to the next slide. So this is showing the differences in reducing the jumps from 2.5 to 1.5 miles. You can see 2010 in this particular picture had a part of the urban area out here on the edges. And again, it's 1.5 miles. So what this will do again is separate some of the outlying areas from the core urban area. And so urban areas could get smaller that way, or there could be 2 urban areas where there used to only be 1. So anyway, this is just more pictures of that sort of thing. Already talked about most of this. We haven't really changed our definitions at FHWA. An urban area is 5,000, over 5,000 population. It's always been that way. The census, again, through the using of housing density, could have a few urban areas that they call urban areas below 5,000 in population. We would consider those rural. I don't want to overemphasize that, but it's important. So as you look in the state at all the urban areas that the census reports, remember the population has to be over 5,000 or greater to be an urban area. We've always called small urban areas 5 to 49,999, or just under 50,000, and 50,000 above are urbanized. I don't have it on this list, but TMAs are important at over 200,000. So state and local officials, this is some of the legal background of this, are supposed to cooperatively adjust. The state is the ultimate authority on this, and the approval authority is with the FHWA division office. So ideally, the way this is done is that the DOT is the lead. They work with the MPOs, local governments, to adjust the urban boundaries and get them right. And my take on that, the way we did it in Ohio is we did it all for them, and then they could bring in their local knowledge to move the boundaries around to where they thought was more appropriate. The boundary should incorporate things like, they only come out every 10 years. So maybe there's local knowledge in the 3 years since the census released the boundary, or since the census was taken and the boundary was released. What do we do? What do we do about this new development that's come along? Should we include that? We have the census put the urban boundary right down the middle of a divided highway. How do we fix that? Remember, the boundaries that come from the Census Bureau are automated. They don't take into account transportation, so that's why we adjust them. We adjust them because they're irregular in shape, and they also lack some of the local knowledge. And you don't want maps where roads are going in and out of the boundaries. They look like, we call it the zebra effect. You want them either in or out of the boundary. Pick one. You want to include interchanges. You want to include all these transportation things around the fringes, either in or out of the boundary, whatever the state or you or the local government or the MPO to deem appropriate. Keep the polygon simple. I've heard some states like to adjust the polygon by using census tract boundaries or census or cluster boundaries, those sorts of things. I don't think that's necessary. What we're trying to do is fix the boundary. so that to take out the irregularities from the census. So the census does a good job of saying this is urban. We should stay close to that, but then we should adjust around the edges to make it easier to use. One of the big things I would say is important on this, if you're a GIS person, you do spatial intersects. What you want when you do a spatial intersect between the road network and the urban boundary polygon, you want to make sure that the resulting extracts match what you would report in your databases to HPMS. Because someday we may go that way where it's all automated. Other things to think about, there's a lot when you adjust a boundary. How do you feel about this road being on the federal aid program? Should it be on or should it not be on? Because remember, if a minor collector in the urban area goes rural, all of a sudden it becomes non-fed aid and vice versa. So maybe it should stay, if you turn to a local road when it goes in the urban area, it shouldn't be on the federal aid program. It doesn't really meet the requirements of the urban area. So those are the kinds to think about. And this is an example of a map, showing the kind of things you need to think about. One rule we had in Ohio, and the way we developed urban area boundaries when I was there, was we started with a greater of 3 polygons. We took the 20, this was back in 2000 actually, so which makes me old. But we took all the corp lines in the state, all 942 corps in the state of Ohio, and we took the new census urban boundary, and we took the old adjusted urban area boundary from 1990, made a new polygon and made it out of the greater of those 3 boundaries. Then we went around the edge of the urban areas, and there was 100 of them in Ohio, and we cleaned them up. So that's what we started with. And then we sent them out to the MPOs and local governments, and they said, well, this doesn't make sense. You need to back it off here. You need to expand it there. The only real rule here is that you cannot make the adjusted urban area boundary smaller than the new census boundary. So it has to be greater than or equal to the census boundary when you adjust. And I've already talked about most of these things, but a lot of it is just consistency. You want to be consistent. You want to make, again, this is a fuzzy thing. These things don't change instantly. They change over a distance. So whether you include or don't include a road, it's really up to you. What makes your maps look better? What makes the data extract better? Those sorts of things. One thing, and I already mentioned this, we wanted to include the entire municipality. Do you really want half of a city or village? I don't know if you have villages in Kentucky or not, probably do, but you don't want half of them urban and half of it rural. Does that make sense? Again, if it feels urban and it's around the edges, include it. Maybe it's a new subdivision, maybe it's a new factory or industrial park or something around the edges that the census didn't include. You might want to include that. This is a map of Stafford, Arizona. I think from the 2010 census, this is what the map should look like that you create for each urban area. Something easy to use, a simple boundary. You don't want to split roads. You don't want to split interchanges or ramps. Include the entire transportation sector or exclude it, whichever works for you. And it needs to be one contiguous polygon. The only thing I would say about this map is if I were reviewing these from our division office, I would ask, why do we have these big rural pieces within the urban area? And without local knowledge, I don't know, but you don't really need to make them that much bigger than the original census boundary unless you have a good reason to do it, because the census does a good job of determining what is urban and what's rural. So what do we see when we review those? And Supan Yoder was on the original slide, the base slide. And she reviewed all of the urban area boundaries submitted to FHWA in 2010. I was still in the Office of Policy then. I wasn't involved in that. Though I was building the guidance, she was doing the real work on it. I'll probably be helping her this go around. But these are the things that we see. So we'll see things where they didn't get the entire Census Bureau urban area. That's the big rule. You need to include the entire Census Bureau urban area when you adjust the boundary. You can't make them smaller. One adjusted urban area to one census urban area. We'll see people try to combine them. One thing to keep in mind is that we don't use population developed from these new adjusted urban area boundary polygons. We use the original census urban area population for all the things we do. So if you combine them, that really doesn't work. So you need to keep them separate. We also see a lot of problems around the borders of the states. The states should coordinate with their neighbors to make sure that their boundaries are line up and match, or if one state's adjusting it, the other one should too. So, they need to match. And our division office can help with that by contacting the neighbors, or if you know folks within the neighboring states and their GIS office or planning or whoever does this, you need to work together to make sure that they match on these boundary ones. I already talked about this a lot. If it's not a population over 5,000, it's not an urban area. You don't adjust those. There should be no boundary on an urban area that has 4,800 people in it. Yeah, and we've seen states grab the wrong set of boundary information from the Census Bureau. We don't need to use the current ones. The 2020 are what we're using right now. They're readily available either from FHWA or from the Census Bureau. You just go download them. Here's an error that we see in the adjustment process. The top is the original Census Bureau boundary, that blue area. The black lines around it in the lower picture of what we're adjusting. And what you'll see is if you look around the edges, like over where the Interstate 40 sign is to the that would be to the west, that boundary should have went all the way around this blue area. And over on the right side, the same sort of thing on the 70 symbol. They missed a bunch of urban area out there. So that's a problem. And that would be that breaks the rule of it has to be greater than the original census urban boundary. What you'll see is there's the one-to-one relationship rule was broken here. This adjusted urban area on the right, that's the black boundary, covers 2 different urban areas, maybe 3. I'm not sure about what that yellow one is, but the other thing I would say if I was reviewing this is, boy, that's a lot bigger than the original census boundary. Why is it so big? You don't want to make it the same as the MPO planning boundary, but the MPO planning boundary should encompass the adjusted urban area. It should be bigger. Generally, that's the rule. So this is an awful lot of adjustment for an urban area this size. It's like twice as what it used to be. Does that make sense? And here's the state line thing that we talked about, the state line error, where the state on the right adjusted their boundary. Again, a lot of adjustment, probably too big in my opinion. And the one on the left didn't adjust at all. This doesn't make sense. It's one urban area, even though it's in 2 states, it's still one urban area. So this state on the left should coordinate with the state on the right. And if they need help, they should contact the division office to contact the division office on the state on the right. So that's something we see quite a bit. Adjusted urban areas, again, what's wrong with this picture? Okay, the blue area on the left, it's below 5,000. It should not have been adjusted. It's rural. And the one on the right is what it should be. That's an urban area with a population over 18,000. So it can be adjusted. So that's a mistake though on the blue one. Ken already mentioned this. Make sure you use the right data. This is one of the worst, probably one of the things that we've seen, and I always insult New York and others when I talk about this. This is the state line, I think between, I'm not sure, it's New York area, so it's probably Connecticut, Pennsylvania, that kind of stuff. You can see the state line going down here, very complicated urban area. And how many errors are there here? Well, these are what are easily identifiable. And they are they're not including the entire urban area where it should be, or the state line comes into play again here in the middle with the purple one. They're just all over the place. The boundaries just don't incorporate everything. Hopefully we won't see this again next time. We've talked to them about that. In fact, I just did training with New York last week. So again, to summarize the boundary stuff, boundaries should encompass the entire Census Bureau urban area. Boundaries should encompass one contiguous area. Boundaries should be simple. Don't overcomplicate this. It's not, again, this is a fuzzy exercise. These things don't change instantly at the edges. You need to think about what you're doing to other boundaries. Do you want to split up cities? Remember, we're only trying to get to the urban characteristic. So include those around the edges. All right, so and again, this is a link back to our urban area guidance. This just shows you that the difference between urban and rural collectors. And one's eligible for federal aid. The rural is not eligible for federal aid and a minor collector, but all collectors are in the urban area. Functional classification, this is just an example of that blue line road in the middle. If it wasn't part of the adjusted urban area, not all of that road would be eligible for federal aid. Again, I would question why this urban area has been expanded so much, but that's what you need to look at. And then get to the one kind of map. We get questions about what's the relationship between the Census Bureau's boundary, the adjusted urban area boundary, and the MPO planning area boundary. This is what it should look like. Once the adjusted urban area needs to incorporate the census boundary, and then the MPO boundary should incorporate all of it. I've had some questions too about FEMA's kicking out projects because they're putting it on an urban federal aid road. Well, and it's in the planning area. The planning area is not considered urban for this purpose. 12 months on this one. So the clock's running on adjusting the boundaries. Overall, it's a 36-month process from start. The clock started running on December 29th, 2022. It ends on, let's see, what did I say, 48 months after that. So the 2025, this all should be done and submitted in HPMS by 2026. As far as the boundary data goes, it really should be done this year and submitted in HPMS next year. So, which would be April 15th for the interstate data, and for the rest of HPMS, it'd be June 15th. So, you know, people are being surprised by this, but this has been our policy for some time. We just want to keep it timely. Don't overcomplicate the adjusting. Of the boundaries. Don't make it too hard. You know, do as much as, if you're the state DOT, do as much as you can for the MPOs and others. Let them then again send in their comments to adjust that. We did the boundaries in Ohio in about 3 months, all 100 of them, and then got them out to the locals and got them back relatively quickly. And if the MPOs or local governments didn't want to play with this, we would say we're going to submit it the way it is, and that usually got everybody's attention, and they came back pretty quickly to adjust the boundaries and make sure they're correct for what they wanted to do. Again, I'm Joe Hossman. I'm with FHWA in DC, and Supan Yoder she maintains our HEP GIS product. If you haven't looked at HEP GIS, just Google it, HEP GIS, and it'll come up, and you can look at that. And it has a lot of good information on the national highway system, on functional classification. We're adding equity products all the time. We have FARS data for the crashes. We have a lot of stuff related to the planning community that you can use in your daily work. So take a look at HEP GIS if you can. I think I'm out of time where I do an example on that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Let's see. Questions for Joe on MPO boundaries. Bernadette says, nice job. Let's see.
Well, thanks. I've known Bernadette a long time. Thank you, Bernadette.
Yeah, Bernadette, you're in DC now, right?
What's that?
Did she say yes?
Yeah.
Bernadette, yeah, okay. So yeah, no questions in the audience, no hands raised. It's lunchtime. Everybody's getting ready to lunch. All right, he's got one question. What you got?
Okay. Can't hear this one.
Let's see, somebody, this microphone over there. Yeah, it might be it. Yeah, this one's on. Looks like the stand's breaking.
Thank you. So if there are multiple UZAs within a metropolitan planning area, should there be multiple adjusted boundaries?
Yes,
In our case, one large one and we have three smaller ones.
yeah. They're really a separate entity than the MPA.
Okay,
So yes,
okay, thank you.
if you want to adjust them, again, you don't have to adjust them, but most states do because of the automation that was involved in developing them.
Yeah, we are working on a file, but thank you.
Okay, sure.
Question. Let's see, a couple takeaways I had were you plan to fund and not fund to plan. I like that one pretty good.
Yeah.
And from 2.5
Yeah.
people, you said you were assuming, the average, I guess is what that is, 2.5 people. Is that right?
Yeah, the Census Bureau considers each household to have 2.5 people in it. So 2,000 households would get you to the 5,000 population on average. The problem with that is that doesn't always add up. So when they bring in the population figures from others, I think they do it in others, from other data, like maybe census block data or something like that. It can be a little bit different. There's probably a few in Kentucky, but not very many that would fall below 5,000 in population. So anyway, if you do have an urban area, if you take the urban area list from the Census Bureau and you sort it by population for Kentucky, and you see some that are below 5,000, those are considered rural.
Okay, yeah, thanks. No further questions. So you give a round of applause for Joe.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for sharing that, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Here. The only other things, I have a few announcements on the agenda. Libby Dockmeyer, new SPAC branch transportation project manager. She wasn't here a minute ago. Maybe they went to lunch already. Chris Koontz is retiring into this month. Thanks, Chris. Kevin, for your service. Kevin Blaine is new project development branch manager in D4. And as Randall Embry retired, all you guys knew Randall. He retired at the end of June. And Mick Logston's covering the KIP to ad planning. And Jim Lefevre is the new lead ad planner. So thanks, Jim, for taking on that role. And that's all I got, guys. The next meeting, October 18th, is all in person. So we're kind of doing that all in person requirement again to get face-to-face time. And thank you guys so much for being here. The in-person people, thanks for the drive. Safe travels home. There's HDO meeting in the afternoon at 1:30 to 3, I believe. Jason Blackburn sent that invite out. Is that right, Jason? 1:30? It's at 1 o'clock. Okay. It's C-117.
Something like a couple of the districts that were.
Okay, they're gonna be in 407. And then MPO's Thomas is what, C-107 from 1 to 3? Okay. All right, guys, thanks. Have a good rest of the day. I recorded this, so I'll post it on the website and the presentations, if I can get the presentations up and on there too. Enjoy your lunch.
Good. Wondering if this is gonna